We're going to call the December 15th meeting of the West Sacramento City Council and Redevelopment Agency. We're going to begin tonight as we do each week with the Pledge of Allegiance. We'd like to invite our guests to join the council and staff in the pledge, which tonight will be led by the City Attorney, Mr. Robert Murphy. The council did not meet in closed session this evening, so we're going to proceed to our regular session agenda, item 1A, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the City Council. We would ask that anyone wishing to address the council on this or any other item this evening to please fill out one of the yellow cards that's available at the front door and turn it in to the city clerk. In front of the clerk is a timer that we use to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard, and to that end we ask that all comments be limited to no more than 3 minutes. Also in front of the clerk is a flip chart from the 70s that indicates which agenda item we're on at any one moment. We do recognize that for some folks, speaking in public can involve some anxiety, some queasiness, and we don't like that here, and neither do they. So we do ask that there not be any boos or catcalls or applause or other demonstration, that we try to maintain a civil discourse here in the chamber, especially when the Corps of Engineers is talking. No tomatoes, only flowers. So with that, we have one request to speak under item 1A. It's by Mr. Bill Lowell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. William Lowell, West Sacramento, for the record. I noticed in last week's about 4 or 5 days ago, maybe, they had an article regarding another bridge across the river between West Sac and Sacramento, and they played with different locations, and they suggested a location to the north would be the best. Well, I'm just wondering, it seems to me like the cost and so forth of the Tower Bridge sets a pretty good example, especially when it comes to land use, and maybe we need a number 2 and a number 3, one for the Southport, South Sacramento, and one for the north of our city that takes us closer to the airport or whatever, and that would increase our connectivity and cut down on commuting and pollution from too much driving. And one other little thing, at Monday night's YOLO bus meeting, I noticed they had an executive session shortly after the first 3 or 4 items, and that took so long. I was able to get in there and say my things not on the agenda, but I didn't have time to stay for the rest of the meeting because I wasn't sure about the connections from the cutbacks and so forth, so I had to take off after that. So I think at the YOLO bus meetings, they should do like you folks do here and have your executive session before the public meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowell. That's the only request we have to speak under item 1A, but we are going to do a quick special presentation under item 1A because we know we have some guests here who are looking forward to this. And so we'd like to present a proclamation to our city attorney, Robert Murphy. So I'd like to ask Mr. Murphy to come to the podium or read the mayor's proclamation into the record. And you might have wondered why you have a couple colleagues in the room, and this is why. So on behalf of the council, if I can draw me up here. Yeah. We're not voting on it. Nobody's talking about it. It's totally legal. Sorry. This is a proclamation of the City of West Sacramento honoring Robert E. Murphy for his years of service to the City of West Sacramento. Whereas Robert E. Murphy received his Juris Doctorate from the University of California at Berkeley, go Bears, and was admitted to the bar in 1967. And whereas Bob has served as a public agency development and finance attorney for more than 40 years. And whereas Bob began working in West Sacramento in 1975 for the West Sacramento sanitary system, which eventually folded into the East Yolo Community Services District. And whereas when the city incorporated in 1987, Bob began serving as city attorney, advising us on matters of municipal law, governance, finance, land use, development, redevelopment, Indian casinos, marijuana, you name it. And whereas Bob played a key role in the negotiation of substantial property and financing transactions, including Rayleigh Field, the police and fire facilities, as well as the Civic Center, Recreation Center, and Community Center. And whereas Bob has participated in a number of professional activities, including chairman of the UC Davis Foundation Board of Directors, president of the Sacramento United Way Board of Directors, adjunct professor of law at McGeorge School of Law. Bob is president of the UC Davis Alumni Association, member of the Board of Regents of the University of California. And whereas Bob has always been recognized for his professional behavior and going the extra mile. And whereas the spirit of this community has always been to pull together and make things happen, and the city has appreciated and honors Bob for being a part of that. And whereas Bob Murphy will retire December 31st, 2010. So now, therefore, be proclaimed that we do hereby commend Robert E. Murphy for his many years of dedicated service to the city and to the citizens of West Sacramento, and wishes him good luck in his retirement endeavors. Bob, thank you.
I commented to Toby Ross and the staff yesterday that this became more than a professional position quite a long time ago. And there are really two pieces of it that were very dramatic for me. And first were the citizens of this community in 1975 who had a lot of disparate parts, but they were very determined to make their city a better place and to get the water out of the wooden pipes that had served them pretty much since the turn of the century. And it was a long fight, but they stayed together and they got it done. And I think they exemplify what's happened since then on just the manifest physical things in the city, from better roads, retail in the southern part and the northern part of the city instead of the casino, the transportation systems and the infrastructure that's happened right in front of the city hall, and the cleaning up the community, to having great baseball, to having a recreation center. But there's another part that's almost as important from my observation, and that is how the community came together through a number of fire districts, a number of sanitation districts, to a community services district, and to the city. And those weren't easily fought, but they got done. So all those things exemplify what this community is all about. And so it's really become a second home. And the credit all the people in this community should have is the respect you have in the region as a result of all that. You've heard it before. I will tell you again, I work with a lot of people in a lot of places. I have the good fortune to do that, but they talk about you all the time, and they should. I also just want to say to the council that in those 40 years, I've worked with a lot of staffs, professional staffs, private and public. You have one of the most professional, dedicated, and ethical staffs I've seen. I don't always say that when I was working here for a different reason, but I can say it now. And I think the last 2 years have made that more obvious than ever. Those have not been easy years for you, for your staff, or your employees, but their professionalism shines through, and I'm glad to be part of that team. Thank you very much.
Mr. Villegas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the evening isn't over, and so it's not too late for you to give us some crazy or poor advice. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I don't think that's going to be the case, Bob. I want to be honest and say that I really, truly do appreciate your honest demeanor and your approach to some very difficult, very complex issues that we've had to deal with both publicly and privately. The way in which you handle yourself and your firm, you represent us, is top notch. I feel very fortunate to have had your services here. I don't know about 1975 because I was in third grade, so I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention back then. But I certainly know that for the last 10 years, I have felt extremely comfortable and very fortunate to have you representing our city. And I don't say that lightly. The way in which you approach issues that we have dealt with in the last 10 years, very complicated, very difficult issues. You're very strategic in your approach, and you work very well with what can oftentimes be a very difficult council to bring consensus on issues and to move us forward. And I attribute a lot of our success, the fact is we've not been sued in quite some time. And I know not every city is as lucky as that. And sometimes it's by avoiding difficult or controversial situations. But we certainly don't do that, but you manage to keep us out of trouble when it's important. So thanks for your service here.
Mayor Pro Tem Christoph.
I guess Bob and I probably go back the longest, but I can remember when Bob was an attorney for the Water District because my father served on the Water Board. And so Bob's really been part of our family for a long, long time, and it's a relationship that I certainly cherish, and I think it's been really a godsend for the community of West Sacramento. Bob has served the community of West Sacramento very well. I would even go so far to say is I know that he wasn't born and raised here, but at the same time, I think we all consider Bob a West Sacramentan because he has really looked after our interests. There have been times when he's given opinions that we may not have agreed with, but at the same time, they've been sound, they've been solid, and he always has good recommendations and reasons for making the comments he makes or making the drafting the papers and things that he did. For that, you'll truly be missed by me, you and I think the rest of the council and the community as well, because you have served this community extremely well, and I appreciate that. And I know it's not just you. I mean, you're part of a firm and you've got some great staff, but you develop the staff at the same time, so I look for a really nice, smooth transition. Because of the work that you've done previously.
I'd like to join both of my colleagues, all five of us, in both congratulating Bob. Many of us serve on other public agency boards and commissions, and I serve on quite a few of them and work with a lot of other agency attorneys. And there's no one of your caliber, Bob. And your legal advice has been impeccable. It's often more conservative than any of us would like it to be, but that's why we need an attorney, and none of us are. But I think, unique among most attorneys, you don't trample on the democratic process, both out in the world, but even in our meetings. I mean, what you just said at the podium is probably the first time anybody that most people who watch our meetings have ever heard you say anything at our council meetings. I mean, we have to be on the verge of breaking a law for you to interject. And that's unusual. In many boards I'm on, the attorneys feel the need to demonstrate how bright they are or to make everything into a legal issue instead of a question about what are the values and the aspirations and the hopes and what you're trying to accomplish. And that is essential to the success of a place. That style that you've brought, the confidence that you have, that you know that when we get back together again, or we're in closed session, or you meet with the staff, that you'll be able to fix. If we do something that's just a little problem and not a flagrant violation of the law, you'll be able to work with us to fix it. So you allow the process of democracy to work without making everything into a potential case of litigation is very important to our ability to take risks, to be creative, and to explore and to, as a community, the possibilities that are in front of us. And that quiet confidence and smarts around the law is served this community extraordinarily well. And I know the council has very much appreciated that. So thank you. I know you could have retired long ago, and one of the reasons that you haven't is because of your passion, your dedication for West Sacramento and for the people that you work with here. And we are very grateful for you sticking with us. And we know you're not leaving the world. You're just leaving the council chambers for a while. So we look forward to seeing you again. But thank you very much for all that you've done for our community. All right, well, now we're back, returning to our regularly scheduled programming, which is item 1B. Oh, let me announce for item 12, if anyone is here for item 12, which is the item on the California Indian Heritage Center, the city manager has requested that we continue item 12 to a future meeting, most likely in January. If there's no objection to that, that will be the order. So if you're here for item 12 specifically and exclusively, we're not going to hear that item tonight. It will be taken up at a future meeting, most likely in January. So item B is council communications. Are there any reports or other communications this evening? Mayor Pro Tem Christoph?
Yes, I do. On Thursday, December 9th, the West Sacramento JPA, Water JPA met, and a couple items of interest. One will be later on in our agenda item with the GRR, with the General Evaluation Agreement given by the Corps. But a couple of the other items were our first bond issuance, which was $10 million, is getting ready to expire. And so we need to, we've been discussing the possibility of bringing another bond issuance together, probably a $20 million bond. And if everybody will remember, the way we pay these back is through the assessments and through the things that the people voted on. They voted $40 million worth of flood work to be done. I mean, $400 million, and 10% of that was ours. So we are talking about the need for another $20 million bond. That'll take care of the rivers, take care of CHP Academy, the properties being CHP Academy, and also do some of the work that is presently being undertaken by the port and the confluence of the Sacramento River. We're doing a setback levy there, as everybody remembers, and matter of fact, since we're doing a setback levy, we're allowed to go in and do some of the work now. So I think either this week or next week, you will, weather permitting, you will see some activity over there. And one of the other issues is the possible closure of South River Road. So there'll be proper signage, and of course there will be public notification and things that the Corps, the city, and will be going through, and the Reclamation District will be going through, so that we can, get the work started on that. And so those were the major issues that were discussed at our meeting, and with the exception of GRR, which is coming up a little later on in our agenda. Anybody have any questions?
All right, Mr. Villegas.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple reports to provide. One is the Yolo County Transportation District met on Monday, and there's been a change with respect to the representative for the district for the streetcar. And so I will serve as the district's representative now to the streetcar committee, which will be meeting tomorrow morning. So that change occurred on Monday night. And then also, I think, as you'll recall, historically we've had annually we've had an unmet transit needs hearing that was required by the Transportation Development Act. We've had them here in West Sacramento. So this year, well, we're not doing it the way we used to do. So this year, it'll be held on Saturday, January 22nd, in Woodland at the Community Center at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then also part of the meeting, we received updates from the district director regarding the federal appropriations process. And I know that we all go through this every year in terms of trying to make sure that our district, our local needs, our county needs match up with the region's needs, so that the issue papers that are presented or provided to everybody for the annual cap-to-cap trip in mid-spring are all consistent, because that's what they want to see, is that everybody's on the same page. Although a lot of the work occurs the first part of the year, the district director will be contacting city staff to make sure that we're all on the same page as we get our proposals brought to the board for consideration. And then we also spent part of the evening talking about the strategic goals and implementation of the long-range plan for the district. The other update that I wanted to provide the council was, and I think it's pretty well documented in the newspapers and the media in the last couple of weeks, and that is the regional sanitation district. The draft permit was considered by the Regional Water Quality Control Board last week, and as predicted, the district supported, well, after a 12-hour hearing, the district board supported staff's recommendation, which is to essentially issue the permit in draft form with the costs associated of up to $2 billion to create tertiary treatment for the plant. And as a result of that, I think the next step is going to be for the board to take it to the state board as an appeal. That has to happen by the beginning of the year. And so staff is putting together the necessary documentation. We feel that we have good documentation. We don't, it's not likely to get overturned. I mean, the chances are probably slightly better than what they were at the regional board, but nonetheless, that's the next step that will be taken. I think that's the responsible thing to do. In light of all of that, which happened last week, this morning, as you may have heard, Senator Pro Tem Steinberg and Assemblymember Dickinson held a press event in which they introduced a couple different bills that are going to be introduced by them, respectively, to both encourage the state staff to work with us to help offset some of those costs, albeit it's only $50 million. It's a starting point. And so that one of the bills will hopefully encourage the use of some of the bond funds that were passed, the water bond funds, and I forget exactly which bond it is, but there are several that are out there that have not been sold. And so the idea is to provide some legislation that would help encourage the use of funding to offset some of the costs to the Sacramento region for the eventual changes that might have to occur to our plant. The other bill would actually help us get a better sense of sort of how the recycled water would be used, because the water commodity is quite precious, and is, to the extent that we can recycle it, use it, sell it, do whatever it needs to make sure that we're getting its best use. That would be another bill that's being considered. So those are a couple of things that are happening. And the last item is the Universal Preschool Executive Committee met, and some good news. We were awarded a $10,000 Verizon grant, which is a testament to the good work that the staff are doing. And we're hopefully going to move forward on a grant writer, because there are some really good opportunities to continue to improve upon our universal preschool efforts. And so we think that utilizing services of a grant writer would be very beneficial at this point. So that's it.
Mr. Ledesma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick update on the city school 2x2, which I attended back on December 6th with Councilmember Villegas. Also attending was the superintendent, the district, as well as from the city staff. Our city manager and Bob Johnson attended. Attending for the school board was Mr. Weston, school board member Weston, as well as school board member elect Mr. Menke. A couple of things that came up worth noting. We're happy to have on the agenda at the which was put on the agenda by the superintendent, was the possible look at joint use agreement for the public access of River City High School's track. It was a very preliminary discussion to get the ball rolling. Our staff, led by Mr. Johnson, provided some outlines of possible use and how the city might manage that. It's still very early on, but we're encouraged by the openness of superintendent to put it on the agenda, and Mr. Weston had promised to put that on the agenda for a future school district meeting, so they can discuss, and hopefully we can kind of keep that ball rolling. So we'll be tracking that with the new school 2x2 members as they come on board at the next meeting. We also had a very brief discussion, started some discussions around a new Northside Community Center with the district's facilities that they may be, as they're consolidating facilities on their side. So just some preliminary discussions on their side as we begin to plan with them, possible use of a joint use with them on some of those facilities that we could use for city services and parks and recreation activities and so forth. So that was really about it. So again, we'll have another, probably 2 more members. I think they were elected at the last school board meeting for the next meeting, so we'll have an update then.
Mr. Johannesson and I this morning attended the 75th birthday party for the Tower Bridge, along with Mr. Beers, and Mayor Johnson, and council members Cohn and Ashby from the city of Sacramento, as well as the director of Caltrans and the region director who handles all of our projects. It's a good ceremony, but I think offline we were having conversations with them about the Sacramento River crossings study, what everybody else in the world calls the bridge, another bridge across the river, but which we've all agreed to keep calling the Sacramento River crossings approach instead. So, the Tower Bridge ceremony was actually a very good time to be talking about the need for additional bridges, but also the, getting down to business on it. So I pointed out in my speech the city of Sacramento started talking about a Sacramento River Bridge that became the Tower Bridge in the beginning of 1932, and by October of 1932 had already approved the project, allocated 30% of the funding, and the project was finished in construction after 18 months. So, we've already spent way more than that on the next river crossing with no bridge, with no construction to show for it. So we ought to get down to work. There's we're going to be scheduling, I think we've already got a meeting scheduled actually with Mayor Johnson in January about that study and about next steps, as well as with council members Fong and Ashby as well, who represent the two riverfront districts that are across the river from us. So that was this morning. Last Friday was the SACOG's annual regional forum, and the focus this year was on the rural-urban connections work. Last year was the blueprint, an update on the blueprint. This year was on rural issues and their connections to urban areas like us. So there were, I think, about 800 public officials and planning folks and members of the public and community groups there. That is feeding into our next Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And I just I think I mentioned this once or twice before. We're rewriting the region's Metropolitan Transportation Plan. That's the 25-year expenditure plan of roughly $40 billion of all transportation funds, state, federal, and local, between now and 2035. And I chair the committee that's doing that, but one of the principal, we have a couple of principal issues guiding that. One is the climate change targets that we're working towards on carbon because of AB 32 and SB 375. That's one frame around how we're updating the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. But the other one, which is more significant for us because our general plan is already oriented towards those climate impacts and the changes that we're making. But the other significant one is the last Metropolitan Transportation Plan is based on a variant of the blueprint land use map, which was drawn during the boom. And so what we are required by federal law to have a regional transportation plan that reasonably matches our ability to actually pay for it. So we can't simply say everything we had in our last Metropolitan Transportation Plan, we're just repeating now. The new plan is going to have to substantially pull back the amount of land development between now and 2035 that's in that regional plan, which also means then pulling back transportation projects of all kinds. And so it's right now it's mostly a modeling exercise and a policy exercise at the Transportation Committee, but it will have very real impacts around where in the region we've determined growth will occur, of what kind, and then what sorts of transportation investments will be financed starting now in order to serve that growth. So obviously, I'm paying a lot of attention to it, but I want to make sure that the council's fully aware of that arc of policy discussion that's occurring at the regional scale. It won't require conformity at the city. We don't have to match our general plan to it, but to the extent to which our general plan depends on major roads or interchanges or rail systems or streetcars or other projects, they need to be in that plan, otherwise they can't be built. So it is an important connection to our own work on land use and infrastructure planning here. The other issue is that Metropolitan Transportation Plan is the basis, and I know this is getting a lot of layers, but it's the basis for the sustainable community strategy by which we meet the requirements of SB 375 and AB 32. That matters to us because, if the council will recall, when we had the big water fight, when the legislature passed the big water package, and there was a proposal to say that everywhere in the Delta, all local decisions will be subject to appeal to the new Delta Stewardship Council, this new state agency. And the way we were able to avoid having essentially become a colony of the state was to say that any place that any actions that we're taking that are consistent with the sustainable community strategy aren't covered by the Delta Stewardship Council. You can't, those don't count, those can't be appealed. We retain our full local autonomy. The Delta Stewardship Council will begin with its actual plan and its rules and its appeals in roughly a year from now. The sustainable community strategy is not going to be complete until around April of 2012. So there will be a window in which, at least at this stage, we're still trying to figure out how to close it, but at this stage it looks like there may be a window where we are subject to the covered action provisions of the Delta Stewardship Council. So, you know, we're all trying to put our heads together at the city and at SACOG and at the Delta Protection Commission, the Stewardship Council, about how to avoid that. Nobody wants that outcome, but whether or not the Stewardship Council decides they're going to actually overturn any of our decisions isn't really the issue. It's that the potential for it means that, you know, people could just start filing appeals, which would gum up projects that we have that have absolutely nothing to do with anything that the state's interested in, but it still means you have to go through the process, and it still means that projects get put on hold during those appeals. So it is a, you know, it's a short window, but given the amount of projects that we do, public and private, in the city of West Sacramento, it has the potential of being problematic. So we're working on that. I hope to have an additional update at the first meeting in January, but we're going to keep trying to work to close that window. All right, item 1C is appointments to boards and commissions. All the members of the council have submitted their nominations for the boards and commissions. I'm reviewing those and conducting interviews over the next couple of weeks, and then we'll have appointments for the council's consideration in January so that the commission's new membership is fully in place for their meetings beginning after our first meeting in January. So. All right, that brings us to item 2, which is consideration and presentation of a proclamation honoring the 75th anniversary of the Raley's family of fine stores. Is there a motion on the proclamation?
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Villegas and seconded by Mr. Johannesson. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. That motion carries unanimously. I believe Ken Miller is here from Raley's, right up front. Join me at the podium. They can see us on the camera, on the monitor, so it's okay to turn your back to us. All right, so this is a proclamation of the West Sacramento City Council honoring the 75th anniversary of Raley's family of fine stores. Whereas Raley's family of fine stores has maintained a high level of customer service and a goal of providing busy families with delicious pre-made meals and a wide variety of groceries and household items at an everyday value. Who wrote this? Your marketing department. Yeah. And whereas founder Tom Raley opened the first store in Placerville in 1935. And whereas the family-owned and operated company has grown to operate 133 stores, including 84 under the Raley's banner, 21 Bel Air markets, 22 Nob Hill food supermarkets, and 6 food source stores throughout California and northern Nevada. And whereas Raley's family of fine stores opened its headquarters in West Sacramento in 1984, in an investment that demonstrated the company's faith in West Sacramento's future. And whereas Raley's family of fine stores has provided quality jobs to West Sacramento residents, participated with the city in multiple civic endeavors, and focused on environmentally friendly operations and the availability of organic produce. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that the City Council of the City of West Sacramento does hereby congratulate Raley's family of fine stores for its 75 years of exemplary service. Ken, thank you so much.
Just what I need. Well, thank you for honoring us for our 75 years of service. Raley's Family Fine Stores have been in West Sacramento. Our corporate headquarters have been in West Sacramento for over 25 years, and we're honored to be part of this city. Tom Raley always believed that there was potential for that riverfront over there, and and we're honored to be recognized as a local business and a provider of quality jobs and a community partner with West Sacramento. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. We are very proud of Raley's. I mean, for locals, Raley's has been a part of this community forever. Sometimes we take it for granted, but we're one of the Raley's is one of the region's major corporate headquarters. I mean, Raley's is a big deal in the United States and certainly in our region. And before West Sacramento was the flavor of the decade, Raley's was what has been with this community and stuck with us. And been an investor and a believer in West Sacramento for a very, very long time, and we've been extraordinarily proud to host them here. So thank you very much for sharing their celebration with us. We're very proud of you. We're looking forward to another 75 years. Thanks, Ken. All right, that brings us to the consent agenda, which is items 3 through 8. We have a request for public comment on item 4, and we're going to remove item 6 from the consent agenda and take it up separately.
Thank you.
All right. So are there any other items on consent that any member of the council wishes to remove, or any item for public, for question or comment? 7? All right, then item, we have a request for public, actually, let me do 7 first. Item 7 is consideration of approval of the YMCA Superior California as the Director of Record and operator of the Child Care and Preschool Center in the West Sacramento Community Center. Mr. Villegas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to pull this off just to make a quick comment. And I wanted to thank Carol, and I know Justine and Sean have worked extremely hard. They had a good list of applicants to provide child care and preschool services at our new community center across the street. We've been talking about this for a long time, and they went through and they found a good operator. We're excited about the prospects. If you haven't seen what the facilities look like, they're very nicely set up to begin to provide good child care and preschool services by next summer. So I just wanted to pull that off and make that comment. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Villegas. Item 4 is consideration of Resolution 10-79, declaring intent to abandon a public right-of-way located at a section of South River Road at Tower Bridge Gateway. And we have one request for public comment. That's by Dan Ramos.
Good evening, Mayor Cabal, members of the City Council. I just want to real quick, it's something not on this agenda item, but I do want to say a real attaboy to Bob over there in terms of all the service he's given the city. It's been an outstanding pleasure to work with Bob over the years, and wish him well in retirement. He's been a class act and very professional, and really appreciate all the good work you've done, Bob. Thank you. I'll get on to, I was going to read, I'm here representing Ramos family tonight. And regarding this issue on the item before, the proposed abandonment of public right-of-way along South River Road, we previously sent a letter dated November 30th, 2010 to the city stating that we did not object to the proposed abandonment, subject to our reservation of certain rights and potential claims described in Section 4 of our exclusive negotiating agreement dated October 6th between the city and the owners. There's a copy of the letter that's been provided. I believe you have it. We do not approve of the proposed abandonment of this public street. We provided the November 30th letter to the city as part of our continued efforts to cooperate with the city to try to reach an agreement relating to the resolution of certain property rights in accordance with our exclusive negotiating agreement. As of today, negotiations have been unsuccessful. We remain prepared to work with the city to try to reach an agreement as contemplated under exclusive negotiating agreement, but unless and until we come to an agreement with the city regarding the resolution of our property rights as described in the exclusive negotiating agreement, we must remain on the position that we do not approve the proposed abandonment of South River Road, Tower Bridge Gateway. Thank you.
Mr. Ramos. All right, those are the only requests we have on the consent agenda. Mr. Christoph?
I have a question. Toby, on that, if I read this agenda item correctly, all we're doing is consolidating it for ourselves and putting it in from city ownership or agency ownership or whatever it is, all into one. Is that?
That's actually item 5. I think that
Right.
they were testifying with respect to item 4, which is the setting of a hearing date for abandonment and expressing opposition to that abandonment. I don't know, he didn't actually determine or comment on whether he opposes setting the date. If we don't reach some arrangement with the Ramoses on that, we would likely pull that abandonment request. So in my mind, the council at your option could either go forward as presented or you could continue it. But in taking the action this evening, all you're doing is setting a date. A future action would be required to actually abandon.
Okay.
Johannesson?
Is there, are we under any time pressure here? Is there a need to set the date now?
The only reason to set the date now is if in the event we were able to reach some agreement with the Ramesses on the land exchange, it would be the mechanism by which we could accomplish that land exchange in the timeframes that were set out in the NA.
But I mean, in terms of having a date out there, is there anything that's really contingent we need a date sooner rather than 2 or 3 months later?
For the city, no. For the Ramesses, yes.
Okay. And continuing the date would allow you to negotiate further, more time?
We can negotiate whether or not we continue the date. It's unrelated in real measure.
Okay.
Further questions or discussion? All right, seeing none, now that Mr. Beers is gone, would somebody like to move the consent agenda? No one has for like 7 years, so.
So I need to,
We've pulled,
we pulled 6,
We've
right?
already pulled
Okay, I
6,
just want to
yeah.
make sure we're aware of that.
so is that a motion?
So moved.
All right, it's okay, it's been moved by Mr. Ledesma and seconded by Mr. Villegas that the consent agenda minus item 6 be adopted. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Item 6 is consideration and approval of the nonprofit financial assistance funding for fiscal year 2010, 2011.
Yes, Mr.
Ledesma?
Mayor, I will be recusing myself from this vote.
All right, is there any question or discussion on this item? Mr. Johannesson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think, I guess I need a little more clarification of what's going on with this. In the past, I think we had a $5,000 maximum in the mini grant program. And in the past, we had a number of different activities that were brought to council, and the decision was made at council. And this is basically the city granting $30,000 to the community. Right now, I think more than ever, nonprofits are in need of financial support. The problem with this process is that we've got a subcommittee of a commission, a non-elected commission, making an analysis that we don't see here. We've got to answer to the voters, to the people. We don't know what it went into categorizing these in terms of how much each organization receives. Some of these, for example, are way over $5,000, which we've done in the past, which basically means other nonprofits that may need a little less financial assistance aren't going to be able to get it. And I know we've talked about having a procedure, a more formal procedure for how the city supports nonprofits, and I know this the process that we're operating under now is back from 1995, and looks like it was updated in 2007. But I'm just a little uncomfortable approving this allocation. In all these charities, I think it's a good call, but I'm not sure the outreach to the community on the other charities that are that could benefit from these mini grants. We didn't receive any other, according to this, the only applications we received were the 5 or 6 that are in the staff report. So there's a lot of holes in this, and I'm not real comfortable, doling out $30,000 of city money without further analysis and more details brought to council on how we can better support our nonprofits.
All right, I should note for the record, Mr. Villegas has also recused himself from this item. So,
Okay.
Mr. Christoph?
Oh, yeah, Andre, Mark's right. I can remember in the past, we would have 20, 30 different community-based organizations that apply. As I looked through this, I didn't see that same list. I don't know if they applied and if the commission said, well, no, we're not headed in that direction this year, or whatever it may be. But I mean, I can remember, Bobby Sox and Little League. I mean, you name it. It was just, there was a whole list, and they would give $1,200 to somebody, $1,000 to somebody, $500 to somebody, whatever it might be. But where is that process? What happened?
This is probably a better question for Mr. Johnston to answer, as it gets into the philosophical decision behind why we went from the community mini grants to the nonprofit assistance fund.
Thanks, Andre. We actually looked at the criteria early in the year. We took somewhat of the council's lead when we talked about in some of the budget discussions going back a couple of years ago to really focus on core services. With the pot of money shrinking, as you recall, it was actually on the table for cuts, and I think the council last year left it, left it intact. We were getting so many requests for the money with the limited pot of money. We actually changed the criteria. There was a newsletter item that went out to the council that kind of explained that, and not hearing any comments back from council at any point, we sort of went ahead with the new criteria. And basically, the way the new criteria was set up was we really kind of focused in on food, shelter, clothing, those nonprofits that really focused on health and well-being of the residents of West Sacramento. And when we advertised for the grants, we really left out some of the sports teams, some of the sports leagues, and that sort of thing. If the council would like us to reconsider that, we'd be happy to go back and reconsider that if you'd like to see more information. But it really was a change in criteria, I guess, this year as a measure to really look at some of those services, those nonprofits that really offer those essential health, well-being, food, shelter, clothing sorts of things, given the tougher economic times.
Mr. Johansson?
Yeah, I mean, I would favor taking a look at that because it's, the situation is quite a bit different now than it was even a year ago. And the question of whether or not the support to sporting activity is a good thing versus, some other food-based. See, and the other thing is we don't know is, can these organizations, can they partner and have matching funds and basically make the dollars go further? Some organizations can't do that either because they're not 501c3s or, they're just starting out or whatever. But, to support some type of sporting activity or some kind of neighborhood cleanup or whatever it is, to a lot of people that's more of an impact on their lives, and they're seeing that a lot less. Those services drop a lot. It's a lot more noticeable now than some of these other things. So I think it's, the criteria that has been laid out is, I think, maybe a little bit too limiting now. And you see this all over, that nonprofits are really taking up the slack for the decrease in city services. The Parks Department is having community cleanup days, and in fact, I participated in planting roses, a couple weeks ago, and those are the kind of things I think that, people really start getting into. So, and I just feel that it's kind of our job on those types of policy issues, and I feel it's a little too restrictive how it's laid out now.
I agree. I get the criteria that you laid out, and obviously I didn't notice it when you proposed it, the change in the criteria. But for me, it's a fundamental philosophical difference. I don't see this fund as being principally about service delivery. It's too small for that. This fund, to me, has always been about civic infrastructure. It's about providing essentially seed money for the community to evolve and grow nonprofit community groups across the whole range of what it means to live in the community. And so, the $800 to the community orchestra, or the $500 that keeps the historical society, not afloat all the time, but that provides that a little bit amount of money that says, yeah, the community's with you. Go out and do that. So it's not, and I've always had a concern about the increasing grant amounts, because I don't think that's what this fund is. To me, it's a startup fund to help these organizations grow into their own, because we can't have a healthy community without the arts and the sports and health and human services and the full range of other services, but we can't direct fund them. And so instead, we're providing thousands of dollars to Community Care Health Systems, which is great, but Community Care Health Systems is I don't know if it's a multi-million-dollar nonprofit, but it's a very large nonprofit. And I'm not, and while we're not supporting the Historical Society and the orchestra and the new West Sacramento choir and, which is just a ragtag, each of those are a ragtag group of 12 or 20 or 50 people in the community trying to figure out how do we create a nonprofit, what does it take? We just need a little bit of money so we can put on a fundraiser and a spaghetti feed to make it happen. To me, that's what this fund is about creating the conditions for civic groups to grow up on their own, as opposed to being $10,000 to a large organization, or to be core support for just 4 or 5 of them. So to me, it's a fundamental philosophical difference. I get what you're trying to do, and if we had 60,000, I'd be fine putting 30,000 in one and 30,000 in the other. We don't. If we were to revisit this, I think a fundamental rethink about what it is that we're really trying to accomplish with this fund makes some sense, because these are all great organizations, and the need is there. The need is 100 times this at least. We can see that just now with the Christmas Basket Project and others, just trying for the holidays to mobilize for some of these services. But I would hate to come back in 5 years and say we've lost all these other community organizations because they didn't have that $500 that was one thing keeping them going, because we put $10,000 into just 5 organizations.
Okay. Would you like to see this come back in the context that it was a year ago? Or would you like to even expand? I think I heard you say we maybe want to take a wider look at this than we've looked in the past.
Yeah, I think, and it's something, I think we'll talk about on our upcoming strategy, but it's, kind of refining what this relationship is with nonprofits. And we've got a good start here, and what the criteria are. Is it, having incorporated a 501c3 status? He says, those types of things. So it's a real thing. And then there's another level that would be, the group of 10 people or whatever that have a good purpose and are going to do something for the community that makes sense. So I think, I'm not sure how time sensitive, everybody, of course, needs the money now. So this probably is time sensitive to a certain extent, but I think we do need to look at the policy, and we don't want to politicize it either. And that's the other issue about these types of things, is it gets some more or less objective criteria, and you've got that, but it's just in the 3 categories. So it may be like a rethinking of the relationship between the city and nonprofits.
I personally would be comfortable with, because we are already in December. This is the fiscal year 2010, 2011 allocation. If we go do a reset on this, it's not going to be the first meeting in January, right? Because you're going to have to do some work on it. Parks Commission will need to be involved, and then we'll have to do outreach to all these groups to say, hey, you're welcome again to engage in this. So I would actually be comfortable allocating, if we said, let's allocate half of this money out, we'll basically take these grant amounts and cut them in half, so we're able to provide some support, reserve the other half, so that for a little bit later in this fiscal year, that could also be allocated as well as we transition to a more to a structure that looks or sounds more like what the council's been talking about tonight. But
Okay.
I don't remember, Christoph?
Well, I think that if you grant half, then such a small amount is going to be left, like for the orchestra. We'll just take the orchestra, for instance. If it was community orchestra, and they had requested $500, so we'd have to cut that down to $250. We'd have to make all of those cuts, because, I think that under the old system, Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission, they reviewed it all, and then they sent a recommendation to us. And so I think that it's going to take that, but you're right, it takes a little bit of time to do that. And getting a hold of all these various community organizations and everything is I don't know if we have a database for it all. We might, but if we could get a hold of them real quickly, it would enhance things, but then they would have to go through the application process, and do everything that they have to do, dot all the I's and cross all the T's. So I would just as soon leave it as the whole pot of $30,000. And then these, of course, these folks here certainly can reapply and apply, but it would be the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission making the recommendation. They may still come up with these amounts. I have no idea. But at least, have everybody in the pot together. It's.
All right, so then would a motion to, how about a motion to essentially to continue the item, recommit it, re-refer it back to the Parks and Community Services Commission and to the city manager, accounting for the discussion that we've had. I would hope that what they would come back first is to us, rather than the next list of allocations, is to come back with some sort of policy statement that would describe what it is we're trying to accomplish, how do we know if we succeeded, all those basics. And then we would say that makes sense, and then go forward and do the actual allocations. All right, does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I'll second your motion.
Okay. I've never made a motion here before, but. All right, it's been moved by Mr. Johannesson and seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Christoph. Is that understood? Motion's understood? All right. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. All right, that brings us then to item 9, which is consideration of continuance of public hearing to consider adoption of Resolution 10-76 to January 19th, 2011, amending the book of fees for various city regulatory activities, products, and services. The city manager has asked that we open and continue the public hearing, so we will open the public hearing and without objection continue it until January 19th, 2011.
Move continuance.
Item,
You can do that. Never mind. Okay.
Item 10 is continued public hearing and consideration of first reading of ordinance 10-2, regulating the dispensing of medical marijuana. Ms. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council.
And Ms. Hamilton, just I have quite a few cards on this item, but for those for whom this is your first council meeting, we ask that all the if you intend to speak on this item testify before the council, that you submit the card to the city clerk prior to the conclusion of Ms. Hamilton's report. Once the council's discussion and the public testimony have begun, we don't take any additional cards. So if you're wanting to speak on this item, this would be the appropriate time to turn in the card. Thank you. Please proceed.
So this evening, I will be giving a short presentation, and also available for questions is Mona Ibrahimi from the City Attorney's Office and Lieutenant Dave Delaney from the Police Department. This item was last before you in February 2010. And since that time, there have been a few things around the state that have occurred that staff and the City Attorney's Office has been watching. There was a ballot measure to legalize marijuana this last November, and that item failed. Staff and the city attorney have been monitoring related actions in the court system, as well as opinions by the state attorney general. The city of Sacramento ended the moratorium that they had in place when this was last before you and passed an ordinance to allow medical marijuana use within the city with certain requirements. There is a map in the staff report, attachment 5, which shows the city of Sacramento and the medicinal marijuana dispensaries that were plotted by the Sacramento Bee. This article was taken from the Sacramento Bee, and it appears there are about 39 currently in the city of Sacramento. We've experienced some recent crimes allegedly associated with medical marijuana use within the city, and there is a heightened awareness to that. Planning Commission did discuss a little bit of that, some of the things that have happened over the last few months. The Planning Commission, we returned to them for a public hearing on December 1st, and their comments and their recommendations are contained in the staff report on page 2. The reason we returned to them is based on the some of the actions we've been watching around the state and the city attorney's continued review of this land use. The ordinance that was before you in February 2010, before we continued the moratorium, had requirements in it, two in particular, that everyone, Planning Commission as well as council, seemed to have a majority concern over, and that is the residency requirement, which at the time we were talking about City of West Sacramento residency, and further in those discussions, we were directed to possibly change it to Yolo County residency. And also the requirement for identification cards. Based on some court actions, some opinions around the state, those two items have been stricken from the ordinance. That is contained in the staff report as one of the alternatives for you this evening. The remainder of the changes that you'll see, the red lines, those are fairly minor, primarily associated with these two requirements being stricken, and just some technical changes with regard to numbering of the municipal code section. For that reason, for those two reasons that those were stricken, since staff didn't have any other direction from the council, and it appeared that both Planning Commission and council felt strongly about those two items, we also took back to the Planning Commission one of the early alternatives that was discussed, and that is to prohibit the medical marijuana land use in the city. The Planning Commission, after hearing all of this, recommended that the City Council prohibit the land use at this time. They continued to have a discussion about the requirements that they feel need to be looked at further within the ordinance should the council choose to allow the use. And again, those were listed on page 2. Given the timing of the moratorium, staff did not have the ability to go into those and do the additional research and the work that the Planning Commission was indicating. So we have left the ordinance the way it was presented to the Planning Commission. The last time it was also before you, the ordinance to allow, you had requested a map showing the zones where the use might be allowed. That's contained in attachment 4. In the yellow on that map, that is representative of the industrial zones. And at the time, the Planning Commission and staff were looking at the mixed industrial or limited industrial ML and the light industrial M1 as other locations. The ordinance particularly focused at that time on the C2 zone, and those are shown in green on the map. The red dots represent locations of existing youth-oriented facilities that might be near a C2 zone or one of the industrial zones that are identified. These were determined based on the distance requirements that were contained in the draft ordinance from February 2010, and those requirements were 250 feet from any residentially zoned property and 1,000 feet from a school, a daycare, or such youth facility. And so that's how this map was derived. I would say that it is preliminary given the scale of the drawing, but it is a relatively good reference. Staff is recommending the prohibition as indicated by the Planning Commission as well, for the reasons I've indicated. The prohibition can be revisited by the City Council at some point in the future. The prohibition, as with the other alternative, would only pertain to dispensaries or collectives serving 3 or more persons. Less than 3 persons, that doesn't fall under the city's regulatory powers. And just further clarifying, that would not regulate or prohibit personal medical marijuana use. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation and return it to the council. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Johannesson.
Yes, Charlene, on attachment 5, this map of the facilities in Sacramento, it's hard to tell the concentration in Midtown and downtown, but it looks pretty prevalent. It looks like from the border of 99 and 80 and the Capitol Freeway, it's hard to tell, but it looks multiple facilities in that area. And I don't know what the scale of this is, but it looks like probably within 5-mile radius, all of those are accessible. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
So, so really, by not having a facility in West Sacramento, you're still fairly close, I would imagine, to a facility. You just have to go to a different city to a different facility. So, okay, I know that was a concern during the last hearings we've had on this, that it's more convenient to have it in the city, but it looks to me that this is all pretty convenient. I'd be, happy to hear from anybody who comments about that issue.
Are there other questions for staff or the city attorney at this time? All right, seeing no more, we're going to open the continued public hearing from last year and begin to take public comment. Can we do ask that the comments be limited no more than 3 minutes? We have several folks who would like to speak. The first is Kathleen Kettering. Kathleen will be followed by Ken Brock.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and the city council members. I am a medical marijuana patient recovering from other prescription drug use that messed my system up worse than the marijuana did. But the reason I'm here is because my major concerns for not having medical marijuana access in West Sacramento is basically going across the bridge to take care of my business. It's about keeping the local community intact and keeping our business here local. I see everywhere that I shop here in town. I've lived in West Sac for more than almost 20 years, and everywhere I see shop local, think local. So taking my business across the river, and whether it's to go pick up medical marijuana or to go to Walgreens, it makes no sense. When my medication is picked up in different locations, it not only risks financially my spending my money across the bridge, but risks my safety and the safety of others, because traveling across the bridge, let's say on public transit, you encounter more people, and then you bring those people back in to the area. The safety of myself and other patients commuting and transporting is just not a good idea. I don't know how else to put it. And also, having clubs here, I think, or medical marijuana dispensaries would take it away from the street dealers and make it more legit. West Sacramento has had its problem of drug problems in the past, and I'm sure it will in the future, but having medical marijuana clubs will make it more of a legitimate business and less on the streets, and less crime and less competition if it was a regular business, with more respectable hours and less traffic. And also, as far as zoning is concerned, to look at the amount of liquor stores and smoke shops that are available in West Sacramento that are in the same distances of preschools and daycares and child cares, and the same things that you're considering industrializing medical marijuana clubs to, then you should consider industrializing the liquor stores as well. Because I know at least 3 or 4 daycare centers that within a block's radius there's a liquor store. So what's the difference? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, Ken Brock will be followed by Joy Cole.
Good evening. My name is Ken Brock. I'm actually a corporate health law attorney. I was actually here last year in about the same time. I currently represent West Sac Wellness, which is a potential applicant, assuming, of course, the City Council chooses to adopt Ordinance 10-2B as opposed to 10-2A. Couple comments I'd like to make. I'm also a West Sacramento resident. I live here and I own a home here. So a couple comments I'd like to make about the ban after having read the language. There are some comments made in the references. Section 1C references certain types of news stories regarding potential crime associated with medical marijuana dispensaries. That's kind of tantamount, I have to say, to saying we've heard rumors to the effect that there is crime associated with medical marijuana dispensaries, therefore we're going to act on those rumors as if they were fact. Facts tend to be somewhat stubborn at times, and it is interesting that that's in there since the Assistant Sacramento City Chief of Police actually reported to the Sacramento City Council quite the opposite, that he did not notice, that the police department there did not notice any increase in crime or any difference in the rate of crime at a dispensary versus any other type of business establishment. Also, one of the findings represents a case called Claremont v. Cruz. I actually have to respectfully disagree with the interpretation of that case. Claremont v. Cruz did not hold that bans or bars were lawful, but only that the Compassionate Use Act and neither the Compassionate Use Act or the Medical Marijuana Act actually required municipalities to make allowances for dispensaries within their zoning. There's a very big difference between not having a duty to zone and having the authority to impose an affirmative ban. Bans are actually currently subject to litigation, and the legality of these bans is far from clear. So there is a very real risk of liability associated with 10-2A. Also, speaking of the definition, the problem is that the Use Act and the Medical Marijuana Program Act actually don't define what a dispensary is. So it's left up to the municipality to decide how they want to define it. In this case, the way that 10-2A would define a dispensary, it would virtually prohibit any type of collective cultivation activity, which is expressly allowed as a matter of right under Health and Safety Code 11362.75. In other words, 10-2A conflicts with an express statutory right. And, if read literally, would actually prohibit patients from even providing cannabis to people within their own home, which clearly exceeds the scope of the city's authority. So, that being said, just a couple more seconds. 10-2B, I have to say, the second option, which I hope that you will vote on to approve, is actually fairly well written. I think the problems we had with it last year have been largely resolved.
I do need to ask you to summarize.
Sure. To summary, I think it's a good ordinance. I think the city did a fine job with it, and I request that you vote to approve 10-2B. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Joy Cole, will be followed by Nathan Sands.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, staff. My name is Joy Cole. I represent a group called SAC Patients. We're actually a group of patients throughout Northern California. And I'm also a lung cancer survivor, medical marijuana patient. My cancer's been in remission for 5 years. I firmly believe that marijuana has everything to do with that, and I'd be happy to discuss that personally with you. This evening, I realize that you're probably going to more consider 10-2A rather than B, though I would urge you, if you do proceed with the ban, that you don't allow it to stay in existence for too long. Currently, you have residents and people who live and work in West Sacramento who are having to travel either to Sacramento at best to get their medicine, and causing patients who are seriously ill to use public transportation to go into Sacramento during times of extreme weather is punitive, discriminatory, and it's endangering their health further. It's not acting in accordance with what your citizens need. Yes, I do believe that some regulations are necessary. I believe that Ordinance 10-2B is a much better choice for you. Though I believe that from my work with the patients and in the dispensaries in Sacramento, that you could probably use more than 2 dispensaries in your area. Please consider public transportation is difficult for those who are ill. You know, people are spending money whenever they go to the doctors, whenever they go to the pharmacy. And you're asking them to take their money into another community rather than keep it here. You're asking them, they go to their doctor here, but they have to go into Sacramento to get their medicine. And that's prohibitive and it's punitive. Please consider that most of the patients that there are a number of patients that can't be here tonight. They can't come before you because of their work, because of their family situations, or because they're too sick to be able to come out. You know, many of these patients are low income. They don't have the ability to follow this online because they don't have cable and they don't have internet. You know, please remember that there's a large body of people out there that have to remain anonymous, or they just are too sick to be here. Please consider them. Thank you.
Thank you. Nathan Sands, followed by Lynette Davies.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Nathan Sands. I am a West Sacramento resident, homeowner, and also a representative of medical marijuana patients, not necessarily dispensaries, but patients and the rights of patients. And I'm here tonight to talk about this issue, and I'd like to start by saying that we've gone through a long process. We've been to meeting after meeting, been drafting an ordinance, honing an ordinance, spending $40,000 of taxpayer money, and that was back in February, probably more now. And at meeting after meeting, we've really had no opposition either. It's remarkable to see an issue that is so one-sided as far as the public is concerned. And over the course of these negotiations, we've been accused of not compromising or making threats of litigation, and I object to that. I'd like to say that we didn't come into this with a bargaining position that we were going to backtrack later and pretend we compromised. We came in here and told you the straight truth right from the beginning. And after all of these meetings, your attorney agrees with us, and I feel proud of that we have integrity. We told you the truth, and we're still telling you the truth about what's legal and what's good for patients. And I think the idea of a permanent ban, part of the reason was because there have been incidents of violence. I know there was an incident in Southport with a home robbery and so on. This is what you get when you don't have dispensaries. This is what, we're gonna have more of that. It's people start running it out of their homes. They possibly even be legal under your definition. And this ordinance lets us take it out of the residential, put it into secure places, and regulate and control it. Again, the Assistant Chief Police in Sacramento said that they have not had problems with dispensaries, but they did want dispensaries closed down by a certain time in the evening so that they could start dealing with all the alcohol-related calls they get, the spousal abuse, the drunk driving, the bar fights, on and on and on. And as we know, alcohol's on every corner in this community, and I don't see us sitting around talking about that issue much. And this ordinance would not allow dispensaries. Dispensaries are allowed. Collectives are allowed. I think that's been made clear. This gives you control over dispensaries. This lets you put them in the right places, have the police checking them out, check out their records. There's a lot of teeth in this ordinance, actually, and I feel good about that. And you know, the Planning Commission had a couple small objections to this ordinance, and if we had unlimited time and money, I think we could go back and revisit some of those, but I know that we don't, and we've been talking about this for a long time. The moratorium is going to expire, and so I think this ordinance is ready. I think, and as you pointed out time and again, if something's wrong as we move forward, it can be fixed, and I support that. So I'd like to encourage you to please support this regulatory ordinance and not the ban. Thank you.
Mr. Sands. Lynette Davies. Will be followed by Martha Mills.
Hello, I'm Lynette Davies with Crusaders for Patients' Rights. I also work with Canna Care, which is a dispensary in Sacramento. I did take a look at our records this evening. I gave them a call, and I am representing a little over 100 West Sacramento residents from just that one dispensary out of the 39 that we have in Sacramento. So you do have residents here in West Sacramento that have a need for cannabis for whatever reason. It's been approved by their physician. Most of my things that I wanted to address, the others have really addressed. Because also the crime issue of being addressed from Sacramento's standpoint, where we don't have those issues according to the chief of police there, I wanted to also bring up that the Los Angeles, who had 800 dispensing collectives, also made the same determination that the crime was not present. So as far as worrying about, oh my gosh, we're going to bring a dispensing collective into our city and there's going to be crime, it's just the opposite. And that's what they find, is that when you bring in a well-ran dispensing collective, the criminal is taken out of it, and that you have now just the legal patients and a legal entity in place. But not only do you have the illegal entity, you're putting people to work. You're putting people to work within your community. You're bringing an income into the community. You're bringing taxes into the community. It's not a bad thing. This can work out very well for your city, so I really, really am pushing for the 10 to be accepted, because bans are not legal. Because not only did Ken Brock bring up the Claremont versus Cruz, but also just this last week, we had the Qualified Patient Association lawsuit, which specifically states that federal law does not preempt the state medical marijuana laws. We have had time and time again to put this into place, and I think it's important. It's something that we're passionate about, that we want to see the patients have access to the medicine within their own communities. And there is a need here in West Sacramento, so I hope you take the time to take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Martha Mills, followed by Kimberly Cargile.
Thank you for your time. Let me first say that ideologically and politically, I'm a liberal. A liberal is shaped from the social movements of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So it takes a lot for me to come up here and speak to something about personal freedom and about the freedom of choice and something that may be of the social good or of not. So my comments are really heartfelt. I am here, maybe perhaps not for rational reasons, in part for personal reasons. However, 8 years ago when I moved to West Sacramento and bought a home in the historic area on 4th Street, there was still a reputation here of being a rather disreputable place to live. And in 8 short years, and at that time there were still the prostitutes on the stroll and on West Capitol. There was a tremendous amount of crime and a lot of code enforcement issues in the neighborhoods with trash, etc. But now we have a community center across the way. We have a new library. We have a brand new campus for the community college. We have ordinances in place with the motel associations to establish professional standards. We've worked with Redevelopment to bring in thoughtful planning around how to grow a city. All of that, we've stepped up our police, and the culture of the police is changing, and we've stepped up code enforcement. All of those things are the effort to really dissuade people that West Sacramento is still a disreputable place to live. I personally feel that if we allow the ordinance for medical marijuana dispensaries, that we will be undermining all those years and taxpayers' money associated with changing the reputation of West Sacramento. I think that is definitely an economic concern that you should all factor into this decision-making. I still, to this day, just as recently as this Saturday, had someone kind of look at me, and you can tell what they're really asking is sort of like, what's your neighbors like? And what in the world do you do here in West Sacramento? And I have to tell them that it is a good and healthy place to live. Now, on a personal level, just this last month, a home down the street from me that had a license to grow and to sell, to use marijuana, was raided by the police. Since the time of got their permit, they had pit bulls in the front yard, increased floodlights, security gates around, and I could not step into my home or on my porch without smelling a strong odor. And I'm allergic to the smell of marijuana. I'm allergic to it. It makes me sick. And I had no choice in that. They're in my neighborhood, and we had no choice. And yes, we had a lot of quick stop-bys. So I have to say from personal experience, it does exacerbate the crime in the neighborhood, the reputation in the neighborhood. It makes it hard to get people to come and decide to live here. I've seen it on my street, and I don't want it in my community. And I think that just going over the bridge down to Midtown on our new streetcar when it gets in, or our other bus circulation,
Martha.
is an easy enough way to solve the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Kimberly Cargile will be followed by Melanie Gallardo or Gallardo.
Good evening, City Council, Mayor, and staff. Thank you for having us here tonight to talk about this issue. It's a really important issue to me and many other people here. My name's Kimberly Cargile. I grew up here. I graduated from River City. Not the nice, new, beautiful, state-of-the-art one that I dreamed of my whole life, but the old dilapidated one. Not many people actually went on to go to college from, River City. I guess they do now. I know a lot of people who have children there, and it's a beautiful school. But I did go on to receive my degree from Humboldt State University and came back to Sacramento to work. I've been working as a patient's rights advocate since then. I'm here tonight because I have many friends and family members here in West Sacramento who are medical marijuana patients. And I actually had people who were going to come with me tonight, but they're too scared because they're looked down upon for being medical marijuana patients or too ill. So I had a handful of people ready to come with me who aren't here tonight. So I want to speak on their behalf, and I wanted to let you know these are normal people, homeowners, taxpayers, state workers, business owners, who are all medical marijuana patients, who have voted for you guys to represent them. I'm here to let you know that the image you have in your heads may not be accurate of medical marijuana patients. We are very upstanding people. Every group of people has its bad and its good, and I do recognize the speaker before me that there were issues. So there are negative issues in any group of people, including city council members, state workers, any group of people. So, we are a group of people who chose to use a non-toxic natural medicine for a variety of reasons. It's been used for thousands of years as a medicine, and there is a lot of negative propaganda around it. However, I encourage you guys to become more educated on the issue and to look at the scientific research related to it, because it's very valid and it's helping thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in California. When I was at the Planning Commission, I heard them speak about the issue of the safety of our children. And, we also have children and are very concerned about their safety. And I have been to about 50 medical marijuana collectives throughout the state, and you cannot actually get in the door without showing them your ID and your recommendation. So I've never been to a collective that you can actually get in without that. So I'm sure that if you do allow collectives, they will continue to follow the protocol that other collectives do, where right when you walk in the door, they ask for your ID and your recommendation. So I assure you, actually, growing up here, that medical marijuana collectives are the last thing you need to worry about for the children, or many other things. So without safe access, we're actually encouraging street transactions and encouraging crime, which is not safe for the patients or the community. If you'd like to pursue further education on this issue, a great website to go to is www.americansforsafeaccess.com, which has tons of information on the therapeutic uses for medical marijuana and the laws related to it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Melanie Gallardo? Oh, I'm sorry, is Melanie had to leave, so she left written comments that have been shared with the council as part of, in lieu of her oral testimony. All right, so we'll then take Rich Miller.
Good evening, and thank you for taking time to discuss this sensitive issue. I'd just like to say, I'm coming up here before you, not as a West Sac resident, but somebody that's here in West Sac a considerable amount of the work week. My county, which I live in, currently have a ban, which has caused a good hardship to me, because when I leave here, I can't go home and get it in my community, so I'm relied to go to Sacramento. And although I work in West Sacramento here, I would like to see 10-2B passed so that we have safe access to those people that work in this community and don't have the opportunity to go to another community to get it. I do understand there is a lot of illegal activity that's going on throughout the state, but you cannot judge this bad act and criminal behavior by people and reflect it on the rest of the community and medical patients out there that really do have a need for the medication. I stand before you today, able to stand before you today. As of 2 years ago, I wasn't able to do that because I had a serious car accident. I was so medicated I couldn't get out of bed, and therefore started using salves, ointments, oils, and I now can stand before you today because of the use of medical marijuana. I do appreciate your concerns about the community, and I think it would be wise to pass 10-2B, and it would be beneficial to your community and the people in your community, as well as people that work in your community. I think it's a source of revenue that you guys can cap on with special use permits to get a dispensary open. I do think West Sacramento has come a long way in the last couple of years, and I can see it going further. As long as we have an open mind and we take care of the community will take care of us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, those are all the requests we have to speak on item 10. Mr. Murphy, do we need to close the public hearing, or do we leave this open through the January meeting?
But this is the first reading. You can either open it or close it. You don't have to continue it.
All right, all right. So at the second reading, we may have this, but people can still speak. We just won't, this public hearing will be closed. All right, then we'll close the public hearing and return it to the, first, Ms. Hamilton, do you have any answers to any questions or clarifications? There weren't a whole lot of questions raised, but if you have any further information following the public testimony?
Would you like Lieutenant Delaney to respond to some of the comments with regard to Sacramento Police and Los Angeles Police? So we might start with Lieutenant Delaney, and then Mona Ibrahimi might follow up on a couple of the legal comments raised.
Good evening. In regards to the comments that I've heard people attribute to either the chief or the deputy chief in the city of Sacramento, I attempted to verify those because they're new to me. I wasn't able to do so, so I'm really not able to comment. I just didn't receive a confirmation back as to whether or not that was those statements were said or not. And if they were, I would also be interested in exactly what type of crime they were talking about, what the statistical analysis was, how they came to that concise conclusion.
Mr. Villegas.
Good evening, Lieutenant. Because the item or the issue of crime always kind of surfaces whenever we're talking about dispensaries, in your opinion, obviously, and then with the more recent incident here in West Sacramento kind of elevated that level of the conversation. In your opinion, I mean, can you give me some sense of whether, I know the staff report has already included the police department's support of Ordinance A, or 10-2A, and not B. Can you give me some sense of kind of how, or what, from the police department's perspective, what your sense is about the comments this evening? Because the majority of the testimony has indicated that it doesn't create more crime and that there aren't more problems, and in fact, it might be even worse to not have dispensaries because the likelihood is there might be more crime. So how would you respond to that, if you can?
The best way for me to respond to that is that from the crime aspect, I mean.
Is the microphone on there? Because I'm not sure if it
sorry.
is. There's a green light at the very bottom of the base of the.
It's on. I'll just lean in a little bit further and try to talk a little louder. I apologize. I guess to talk about the crime aspects, we're looking at it from two different angles. One angle would be that of the robbery, such as the home invasion down in Southport, and another one would be the aspect of diversion, the providing of marijuana to people who are not entitled under the law. So from the robbery aspect, the police department's view is that you have the establishment of a cooperative, of these type of dispensaries, excuse me, you have a location that's known that has money and drugs for people that would care to take that from them and use them So it's like one-stop shopping. They don't have to commit a robbery and then go buy the drugs. They can do it both at one stop. So it's a heightened robbery target. We look at it from that aspect. From the diversion aspect, the other part that we're concerned about is that the people, it's for people that don't have a recommendation, that's still not lawful for them to use this. And if you happen to see the Sacramento Bee's article yesterday, it said we're seeing an increase in youth using marijuana, alcohol use is going up. So it's the idea of more people trying to get the substance. Of course, we have locations where they know that they can go and try to either get it from people or try to go in and buy it on their own. And without the safeguards that we had in before, where we were limiting it to at least the city or the county, and we had this state ID card so that we could verify that it was the right person, we were ensuring that we weren't going through the process of wasting police resources of, going and detaining someone, having the officer look at this, not giving it credence, not believing that it's a legitimate recommendation that's written on however it's written, because it's not standardized prescription form, and taking the marijuana and issuing the citation or whatever, and then having to go through the court process, and then having it turn out that, okay, it is legitimate, which could have all been avoided with the use of the state ID card. So from those aspects, those are, I guess, the crime aspects, and we're seeing that it would require, it would produce a burden, we feel, on law enforcement resources that are, in the budgetary times stretched a little bit tighter.
Great, thank you.
Certainly.
All right. Thank you, Lieutenant.
Thank you.
Ibrahimi?
Good evening, Council. I'd just like to respond to 3 of the legal questions that were raised tonight. The first of which was the locational requirement between medical marijuana dispensaries in Draft Ordinance 10-2B as compared with stores that sell alcohol and smoke shops. And the reason for that is, first of all, marijuana is still regulated and is considered a crime for anyone who is not a patient that uses it, unlike alcohol and cigarettes. Moreover, Health and Safety Code Section 11362.79 expressly requires 1,000 feet between any medical marijuana dispensaries and the smoking of medical marijuana from certain youth-oriented facilities, unless, of course, that use occurs within a residential housing unit. The second point I'd like to make is that the case of Claremont v. Cruz, which is still good law, has held that cities, in exercising their land use authority, may in fact regulate or prohibit medical marijuana dispensaries. So in the exercise of land use authority, the city would be able to adopt Draft Ordinance 10-2A if it so chooses. And finally, I'd like to remind the council that either with the adoption of Draft Ordinance 10-2A or B, persons up to 3 people, regardless of whether the ban is in effect or whether the ordinance regulating medical marijuana dispensaries is in effect, would still be able to obtain and use medical marijuana. So to the extent that there is a prohibition, collectives could occur up to 3 people, and individuals would still be able to obtain marijuana from their primary caregivers or grow and use it themselves. Thank you.
Mr. Johannesson.
Yeah, on the issue of the ban and some of the litigation that's happened or is happening, how many cities now in the state have outright bans?
The number is continually in flux. However,
Roughly?
I believe that
30%, right?
Well, I guess that's okay. I don't particularly need the exact number, but
there are at least 111 cities.
that have outright bans. Now, in terms of the litigation, have any of those bans been overturned? And what was the basis of them being
From my
overturned?
understanding, the litigation to date regarding bans have been overturned only with respect to issues that do not have anything to do with the ban. For example, the ordinance was
incorrectly adopted or there's tangential issues.
So procedural issues.
That's correct. The City of Anaheim case, which was recently opined in the Court of Appeals this summer and which we were waiting on, did present this as an issue. However, the court did not address the fact of as to the city's ability to outright ban ordinances. And again, the Claremont v. Cruz case has not been overturned.
Okay.
All right, Ms. Hamilton, anything further?
Nothing further.
All right, then we'll turn to the council for further discussion. Mr. Johannesson?
I'll go ahead and start off. Yeah, I think I was involved, I think, at the initial stakeholder meeting when we were looking at this issue a while back, and I had the opportunity to tour a facility in Sacramento. And I don't really think it's about the facilities themselves. I think the facilities, at least the one that I saw, was like a doctor's office. It's clean and looks, at least from the exterior, looks good. But I think the comment about what we're trying to do in West Sacramento, I think that is of concern to me. And also just the location of how close these other facilities are. I know we've heard testimony that it's a burden to go across the bridge, but I'm looking at this map, and if you're on Arden and Watt, you're actually farther away than probably 80% of the people in West Sacramento. So I mean, it's an argument, but I don't buy it. I think there's plenty of places to that people, if they need to do this, and we're not debating the efficacy of marijuana. It's a whole other discussion. Really, it's about having facilities here. In terms of the tax dollars, I think at council we've said that that's not why we're doing this. I think probably speak for most of the council people here that we all have an interest in providing for the health and welfare of our citizens. And so the concept of the dispensary is not the issue. For me, it's more, well, we've got dispensaries within a reasonable distance from here. Sacramento now has 29 or 33 or whatever. And I would just assume wait to see what happens with them, because it sounds like there's claims about the criminality. Maybe it brings in crime, maybe it reduces crime. We don't really know that. But now Sacramento has a real experiment on their hands with the regulation of these. And we've actually spent a lot of time crafting, I think, is a good ordinance. And it will remain a good ordinance if we adopt that in the future. But at this point, I would rather see a wait and see look and go with option 10A.
Other comments? Mr. Villegas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would echo what's been said. I mean, I think part of it for me, and I struggle with it because I go back and forth, and people often ask, where are you at with this, because it's going to come back. And I got to tell you, it seems like it changes every day. I mean, I can certainly appreciate and understand and sympathize with the need for it on a medicinal level. I'm certainly there. There's no question about that. And I think that's been repeatedly brought to this body, emphasized. And I can certainly appreciate that, and I respect that. And then the very next day, I'm troubled again by kind of what does that say? What does it say if we begin to go down this path of dispensaries in our community, where I think was pretty eloquently put this evening. We've come a long ways in all the work, on all the heavy lifting that we've done over the last several years to try to create a completely different image. And, to slip back into what I think was once expected to be or perceived on West Capitol Avenue to represent our entire community, I'm just not ready to go there yet. And I don't say that the dispensaries represent what we once had on West Capitol Avenue, but I just don't think we're far enough away from where our past can haunt us. And I'm just again, and I struggle with it every day, and every day I come back to, what does it say? What does it represent? And I think, like Mark said, if we can sort of kick this can down the road a little bit further, there's no sense in jumping into something when there are, 24 of them literally as you cross the Tower Bridge. I don't know how often you have to access it. I don't know how often folks need it. I would imagine everybody's a little bit different. But I struggle to understand why you need to have them literally at the end of the street versus, say, a mile down the road. So I'm just not there yet. So I would at this point, I'm in favor of where staff's at with their recommendation.
Mr. Ledesma?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excuse me. I too would like to echo some of the comments from the other council members regarding where we are with this, specifically with regards to where we are as a city. I think that is an important part. And another part we are in our city, which concerns me, being a part of the Planning Commission when we looked at this ordinance a year ago, is that right? It was a struggle then was understanding the legal, where we are legally with medical marijuana, that in fact local jurisdictions, local municipalities have to deal with the regulation of it. A year ago when we considered it, we were building in a lot of the checks and balances to manage it, enforce it, and that was a stretch then, and now legally those are being challenged, which makes it even more challenging. The thing that I look at with this to a degree, which adds to where we are as West Side, is that we're also, we're downsized staff, and we're looking at creating more regulation, more cost to our, and I understand that the police force looks at it in two ways. I appreciate the clarification on how you view it, because I was more concerned with, I think you call it the diversionary aspect of it, which is, having to continually manage and having to continually patrol or enforce something. That's something that isn't really clear in how we do that, but the mere fact that we have to address it is a concern to me, because we've been lucky enough not to have cut people from our police staff, but they are stretched as it is, so it would add another layer of how a group having to get involved with it. So that's just another area that kind of continues to sort of, for me, bring me to sort of supporting a ban at least for a while to understand and see where we are. This is a very, I do sympathize with patients that rely on medical marijuana, and I want that clear, that I do. But I'm looking at 10-2B creates for me a real conundrum in that we are in fact building a regulatory framework to manage this going forward at a time when it's very difficult to do that with staff and resources very thin. So it's just one more part I would add to the discussion and some of the comments from the other council members that I would agree with as well. So thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Christoph.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think most of my colleagues have really sort of hit on it, but we have addressed a number of issues throughout 25 years now, us being a city, that have a negative connotation or that are unseedy, and we've tackled those things head on, and we have gotten rid of them. We've done. Not 100%, but I mean, still at the same time, we've made great strides. And I think that we're looked upon in the region as one of the leaders of making good strides in some of those very, very difficult arenas. And I think this medical marijuana issue is one of those that could possibly bring back that negative connotation, or at least be a start to head down that road. Because let's not kid ourselves. I mean, we hear all these good things about these different facilities and everything, but we all know way down deep, there's a lot of issues going on around those facilities. There are a number of people that are getting drugs or getting marijuana that have no business getting it, and we all know it. It happened in LA, it's happened every place it's gone, and we know that. And yet when we try to put in restrictions and we try to put in all these other kinds of things, the courts seem to fight back. I mean, the ID system, the local jurisdiction, that has to be a local entity, making sure that it is a patient. And for me, I'm saying that I support 10-2A. And I think that it will be in the best interest of the city of West Sacramento.
I spent Monday at a health clinic, not in our city, but in north of here, not a collective, but at a regular community, federally qualified health center, community clinic, and sat with a doctor as she handled her regular patients for a day. And so I heard firsthand I was surprised actually at how many patients during the day made the request of this doctor, who's not a medical marijuana doctor's recommendation website like is easily accessible. But how many requests were made from people with chronic pain? So I understand it. I've dated somebody who's been a medical marijuana client. I've gone through the process with him about how to get the recommendation, about accessing dispensaries, about usage, about that whole process. I understand why and the medical need and the medical impact and the alternative that it provides to, in some cases, much more toxic and dangerous drugs. So to me, it is, that there is an important issue here. But I am troubled by it. I mean, I also am, enough in the world to see, you don't have to spend too much time in Midtown to see what the range of what's out there really is. And in some ways, it's not at all like other like prescription drugs or alcohol or tobacco, which are, in some ways, there are regulatory frameworks that exist for those. Right, the federal government and the state government have a wide range of prescriptive policies and rules that have to be followed around, Vicodin or Viagra, around tobacco and around vodka. And there is no framework like that for medical marijuana whatsoever. The advocates and to some extent the courts say the ballot initiative in California basically says you have a right to whatever, and no state or local agency shall put any constraints on that whatsoever. And the federal government says, we think it's illegal, but we're just not going to prosecute. We're going to stick our head in the sand. So we're not going to. There's no regulatory framework. For the liquor stores that may or may not be in every corner, there's a substantial federal regulatory framework about alcohol. And then land use even on liquor stores is tightly controlled by the state. There's 3 state agencies that deal with alcohol, all of which control consumption, sale, usage, location. And so by the time we make a decision about whether to permit a liquor store or not, the range of what's possible to occur at a liquor store has already been fairly narrowed pretty tightly by these other government agencies. When we decide to permit somebody to sell Vicodin and other serious prescription drugs, we know precisely what that means because the federal government and the state government tightly regulate what Long's drugstore can and cannot do. And so you won't find a drugstore in West Sacramento that sells Vicodin in the form of barbecue sauce. You won't find a liquor store that can sell ice cream or Fruity Pebbles or brownies that contains vodka. It's just not allowed, right? So we can be assured that in terms of its safety, in terms of its collateral effects, in terms of its accessibility and attractiveness to children, that process has been handled. Our job is just to make sure that the land use aspects are taken care of. And I'm just not competent as a local official in a rural county in a small town I can't because the state initiative prohibits us from doing any of that. But even if we could, I can't make the discriminations around what all those rules ought to be. And so that's the challenge, is that there's no way for us to be, there are some great dispensaries out there who are doing good work, and there are lots of patients who depend very seriously on this medication. And then there's a lot of bad actors on the dispensing side. There's a lot of bad actors on the doctor's recommendation side, and there are a lot of patients who aren't patients. And God love them, but this is not for us about a path to legalization or about winking about legalization. That's not where this community is. I mean, Prop 19, failed in this community in every single precinct except for the one that includes City Hall. City Hall is the only precinct that voted for Proposition 19. So, in terms of us creating a system that is designed to sort of tacitly acknowledge broad universal access to marijuana, that's not where this community is, at least at this point in time. So it needs to be about the medicine. And this doctor's recommendation process is a problem. I mean, I'm on my computer right now. How easy is it for me to get a medical recommendation? I've been through this process with friends and partners before, and it's quite simple. Why? Because the chronic conditions for which some of these websites and doctors that say if you come by and for $25, I'll issue a recommendation in 10 minutes, and if I don't issue the recommendation, it's for free. If a doctor tried to issue a prescription drug in that manner, we'd go crazy about the conflict of interest and about the abuse of the system but that's perfectly allowed. So if I go on the web right now, I'm told that if I have a cough, if I can't quit cigarettes, if I have nausea, diarrhea, insomnia, if I occasionally experience nightmares, if I have a tension headache, if I have writer's cramp, that this doctor, which is referred to by several dispensaries that are licensed in Sacramento, that doctor will write me a recommendation. That's the problem. Right? We can't control who uses it because we're afraid of litigation around the requirement that it be limited just to West Sacramento or Yolo County residents, but no one is controlling it. If it's tension, headache, and nightmares and insomnia, I qualify for almost all of these at one point during the week, and I should not have that broad of access to a medication. Right? So for me, that's the challenge, is that there has to be somebody that is setting the standards around a medication. Right? If it's a recreational use of a drug that's just like alcohol and cigarettes, I get it. But the voters of this community, the voters of California, just took that issue up and didn't go that direction. If it's about medicine, there needs to be some standards that are rooted in science and medicine and basic and medical ethics, which are not present or regulated in any way, shape, or form through this whole process. And so that's the challenge for me. I really would like to be in a place where we could do this. I think there are plenty of good dispensaries out there for whom we don't need to be worried about crime, that just like Long's Drugstore, it would be just fine if they're a block away from the library and the preschool at the community center, that they're operated at that level of safety, that there's nothing inherent about providing medicine that should be of danger to children or a threat in crime. That's not the problem, but we can't be assured that that's going to be the standard that's executed either by doctors making the recommendations or by the dispensaries themselves. And until we're at that point, it's hard to open the door. And so that's why I am also going to support the outright ban. I preferred the earlier ordinance we had, and it wasn't that we've determined that Nathan was wrong and our attorney that Nathan was right and our attorney was wrong. We haven't. We just determined that this is all all these rules and things that we might do are uncertain enough that it's not worth all the potential of litigation that's out there, on all sides of the equation. When there's plenty of other litigation that's already occurring in other cities on other taxpayers' bills that we will wait for. But for me, if anything, this ought to be a clarion call for the state and federal government, the state to take, and the people of California to take a little bit more rational approach to this than just, it's all about patient access and no one else is allowed to set any rules whatsoever. There has to be something better than that as a system that's going to both protect public health, but also prevent the kinds of pretty rampant abuses that are out there in several parts of the whole market that's been created. And so for that reason, I will also be supporting 10-2A. All right.
For a motion?
Yes, Mr.
Mr. Mayor,
Villegas.
I would move that we certify that the project is categorically and statutorily exempt from environmental review, that we waive the first reading and read by title only, Ordinance 10-2A, amending the municipal code and prohibiting medical marijuana dispensaries within the city, and inform the audience that the second reading of Ordinance 10-2A is scheduled for January 19th, 2011.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Mr. Villegas and seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Villegas. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor? Oh, this is first reading only, so we don't need a vote? I do need a vote, don't I? Yeah, okay. I'm hearing groaning next to me.
Okay.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries, and second reading is scheduled for January 19th. And thanks to everyone, again, who's participated in both tonight's discussion and all the work leading up to this. It's disappointing on a whole lot of levels for a whole lot of people, but I think this is it's the only direction that's left open to us. All right, item 11 is a status update on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers General Reevaluation Report. Mr. Bissett? Oh, and for anyone who's come in late, item 12, which is the workshop on the California Indian Heritage Project, has been postponed. It will not be taken up tonight. So if you're here for that item, we won't be hearing that this evening. Mr. Bissett.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. My last presentation 2 weeks ago was focused primarily on the 2011 levee construction projects and key activities associated with bringing those projects to construction. Tonight's focus will be on the General Reevaluation Report. The GRR is the primary vehicle for securing a federal interest in the West Sacramento Levee Improvement Project. Tonight's status update is the third in a series of updates that the U.S. Army Corps are committed to providing to the Council and the West Sacramento community. Tonight, we are fortunate to have Ms. Alicia Kirchner, Chief of Planning, to provide the update. Please welcome Ms. Kirchner.
Welcome to a typical West Sacramento City Council meeting.
Thank you for having me. I just have one question. I think, are slides going to be up on the screen at all, or just in front of them, and I've got my set? It will be up on the screen. Okay. I'll give that a moment. Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Thank you for having me here. As Mr. Bissett indicated, my name is Alicia Kirchner. I am with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Sacramento District, and I am chief of our planning office. Planning offices with the Corps of Engineers have responsibilities, or lead role, I should say, in developing decision documents for future federal investments that we put before Congress, making recommendations for future flood control works, other types of projects. But in this case, of course, we're looking at accumulating with a recommendation to Congress for federal participation in additional flood risk management reduction measures for the West Sacramento City area. My predecessor, Mr. Frank Piccola, was before you twice in the past 2 years, and he retired in February. I took his position, or replaced him in March, so this is, as Mr. Bissett indicated, my first time before the council, and I'm letting you know that I'm committed to updating you informationally for decision-making purposes periodically throughout the study, whenever you or your city staff deem it to be a good time to do so. It's not very far away for me to get here, and I'm happy to do so.
And Frank probably told you he committed that the GRO would be done by December 16th of this year.
Excuse me?
We'll see.
I think we have that in writing, actually. I'm pretty sure he's
I'm going to have to go find him. Okay, well, with that, if you would go, oh, and I can do this actually. Let me. That's not right. If you don't mind, that would probably be more efficient. Thank you. I thought it would be prudent to touch upon some collaborative the collaborative strategy between the City of West Sacramento, Corps of Engineers, and State of California Department of Water Resources. The General Reevaluation Report is a big piece of that strategy for long-term flood risk reduction measures for the city. There are other things going on as well, and there's a bit of a status update on at least one of the other activities that I thought it would be appropriate to mention at this time. I'm going to touch upon the status of your early implementation projects that are under review by our office at this point in time, as well as slip repairs for the one remaining location along the Yolo bypass. Talk about a Sacramento River Bank Protection Project site down in the Southport area that's coming, and an additional project that we're looking at down also in the Southport area, and another area of concern with the levee down there along the Sac River. And then I will go into a more detailed update of the Sacramento River, of the, West Sacramento General Reevaluation Report. So the early implementation projects for the CHP Academy site and the Rivers site have been under review by the Sacramento District. For a little bit of perspective, part of the long-term strategy is the City of West Sacramento moving forward and tackling some of the more critical levee repair locations in advance of federal participation. In doing so, you are also, as you know, seeking to leverage that investment towards a future cost share with a project that we would do together. And so there are two approval processes underway for the EIPs. One is because it's a request to modify an existing federal project levy, we have a regulatory role in that. So we are looking at the proposals from that perspective. And we also have a review process that where we're looking at, is the work that you're planning to do generally consistent with the types of work that will be under consideration as part of the general reevaluation report? And there is an approval process for that. The approval is to be considered eligible for credit. Once that work is completed and the general reevaluation report is completed, we make a determination as to a value of credit that could be applied towards your cost share in the future for the projects we implement together. Our schedule called for our district office to have review of the EIPs completed this month, and those were sent to our higher level authority on Monday. The next stop is our division regional headquarters, our division office in San Francisco, and our headquarters office. So we've sent it to both of those offices on Monday, and we anticipate a decision about approval for both the crediting and permissions on modification to the project, the existing project, in the spring timeframe. So I wanted to make sure that you had that update. We are also anticipating a future initial early implementation project request for the Southport area that would be an extension of some Sacramento River Bank Protection Project work that we're also planning to do down in that area. Part of what I wanted to illustrate with this slide is just an acknowledgement that there are a lot of different authorities that we're attempting to apply in this area so that we can better enable you all to move out in advance of participation with federal government, which we're working towards also. We also have a special authority that Congress gave to the Corps for the Delta, the Greater Delta region. We call it the CalFed Delta Levy Stability Program. And that is a very unique authority for us. It allows us to look at what we consider to be areas of concern with the existing levees in the Greater Delta region. And there's a bit of an abridged process that enables us to potentially get out and do some repair work a little bit sooner than, actually considerably sooner than it would under our more traditional process. And we also have I believe I mentioned one more repair to accomplish in summer of 2011 on the Yolo bypass. This is the second of the two reaches that demonstrated stress during and after the high water in 2006. So to focus on the general reevaluation report now, when Frank was here, Mr. Piccola was here visiting you in October of 2009. That was near the beginning of the general reevaluation report, and he came to speak to you about the nature of congressional authorizations that the Congress has granted to the Corps. The existing project was built under that authority. We're utilizing that authority to conduct the general reevaluation report as well as to make those slip repairs. He did an overview of our planning process and talked about the milestones that we go through as part of the general reevaluation report. In February of 2010, he came and talked to you about the early planning steps that help us sort of establish some key information and validate it and get some buy-in from our Washington office, our higher Corps authority, to make sure that we're on the right track, identifying the right information. The first portion of the general reevaluation report is really about making sure that we have a very detailed understanding of the nature of potential flooding in the area. That means understanding the levees, understanding the river, the water systems, and how they interrelate under what could be considered reasonably representative flood events, simulated flood events, so that we can get an understanding of what the nature of associated risks to lives and property would be. So a lot of the information that I'm going to present is some of the details of what we've been doing in order to build that understanding, and it's in generating that understanding of how the problems could occur that enables us to set the stage for looking at alternative plans to address the problems and reduce that risk. Next slide. Thank you. So again, we're currently progressing towards what we call the feasibility scoping meeting milestone. This is not the public scoping meeting. That has already occurred. This is specifically a core planning milestone, and this is where we engage our regional and headquarters offices and we review the engineering, the geotechnical information, the hydrology, the hydraulics information, the economic information for the study area, and make sure that we understand the problems, that we're in compliance with core regulations and policies, and that we're on the right track. It's a key milestone for us because it does set that stage where we're identifying these are the problems that we're going to tackle, this is how the problems could come about, sets the stage for going into an in-depth analysis of how you comprehensively address them. So that is a key measure for us. So the team thus far has been working towards that milestone, understanding what we call the future without project conditions, and also going into more detailed scoping of the work that will follow that milestone event. The next 3 slides talk about, present a status of the various technical analyses from the various engineering and economic disciplines and environmental disciplines, what they've been doing, what they've accomplished, what's still underway. It's really intended to illustrate that there has been a lot of activity, a lot's been accomplished, and there's a lot more to do, and there's a lot underway. So starting with our hydrology, our district hydrologists are, the first thing they do, and this is really the first in any of our flood risk management investigations, the very first step is getting an understanding of the water and making sure that we have reasonable assumptions about storm centerings and volumes coming into the area. So they've gone through a process where they've identified that and they've validated that they believe they have a reasonable representation of hydrology coming into the area. There are some hydrology tasks that are being performed by the city and your consultants to the city, and doing wave run-up computations, as well as interior flood analysis. So what's happening in the interior of West Sacramento. It's an important thing to get an understanding of before we start talking about modifications to the existing system, so that we'll be able to measure whether those modifications have caused an increase in issues in the interior drainage system, because we don't want to have that happen. We would want to make sure that that was part of a more comprehensive plan, is that we're mitigating any types of change issues like that. And also we may be able to help with reducing some of the interior drainage issues as part of the project as well. So a lot going on, and a lot of it right now, because we're building towards our first major milestone for review within the Corps and with the partnership, is documentation. We need to document the work that's been done so that experts in the same fields but outside of our core team, core meaning C-O-R-E, working on the project in Sacramento District, we are finding experts across the country within the Corps to help conduct what we call an agency technical review, which is intended to be an independent analysis for validation for quality control purposes. Independent, not that it is done outside of the Corps. There are reviews that will be conducted outside of the Corps, but independent in that it's not done by the people working on the project within the district. Hydraulics, we have another piece of understanding the nature of flooding, potential for flooding in the area is understanding how water is routed through the system once we have that hydrology piece. We are utilizing hydraulic modeling tools that were available and are being updated as part of some sister flood control investigations and projects going on the other side of the river. It makes sense that we've got the same river that we're looking at, same levee system, so there are some efficiencies in being able to come a little bit after another investigation that's already got a lot of work underway. One of the key challenges that we had was updating the datum that the model was based on. Until very recently, we had been relying on, I think it was 1927, 29 topography data, and we really just made the decision as an agency that something more current exists. We need to migrate to that. That was not just something that was done for this project across the river. It's something that we did as a district overall. We've made that conversion. It's taken us longer to make that conversion than we anticipated, but that's one of the key tasks that we've accomplished. We also are developing a frequency of flood events, a full array of frequency flood events, so that we can understand what flows look like coming through the area, through the river system at various frequency events. And the next step with that is to generate floodplains for various frequency events. And that ultimately builds up into our ability to understand what various inundation areas could look like for various frequency events, so that we can get an understanding as to what sort of potential damages there could be within the study area, within the West Sac area. And that'll allow us to put a value, a dollar value, and assign a risk to that existing problem or potential problem. And again, they are also documenting the material so that it can be reviewed. Next slide. Oh, you've got it already. Thank you. Geotechnical, this is a levee system. We're dependent on levees in this area, so getting an understanding of what's going on within and in the subsurface of the levees is very important. I want to highlight that we are leveraging the partnership with State of California. They have done an extensive geotechnical data collection initiative, and we are utilizing the results of that information and analyzing it so that we can understand what kind of levee issues we may have on a reach-by-reach basis, and getting a real good understanding of that, we've learned is very important so that we can really tackle the full extent of the problem. Let's see. I'll move on to economics, flood damage reduction projects and federal participation in them, and it'll enable your own decision-making as well, is what we typically find with our non-federal partners, is getting an understanding of what we call what would without project damages be if we were to not do a project as a result of the general reevaluation report. We look at what potential risk to lives and properties would be. We don't quantify what the risks to lives could be. We talk about population at risk so that we can understand that. But we do quantify the value of structures and contents located within the floodplain. That in turn gives us an idea as to how much project we can afford together, because damages prevented by a project are turned into benefits that help justify a project from a financial and economic perspective. And the next slide is talking about some of the other ongoing activities. Because there are so many engineering activities underway, it's important that we have some technical leads in the engineering field identified to help make sure that everybody is marching towards the same objectives in terms of products, schedules, deliverables. We are working with our real estate team members to identify what rights of entry are needed for surveys that are conducted during the investigation. We don't have all of those in place yet, but we're working to make sure that we have all of them identified that will be needed for the course of the investigation. We like to have those up front so that access isn't an issue as we need to be out there in the field. Our environmental perspective, one of the things we're doing is developing an environmental impact statement as part of the general reevaluation report. So we're making sure we've got all the existing information that we need, setting out to collect what we don't need or what we don't have, and beginning to document some of the early findings, just of what resources are in the study area, so that we can talk about those, what are significant for us to be paying attention to, if anything, for the duration of the general reevaluation report. And we're doing some cultural resources investigations too. We completed our records check, and we basically are reviewing the kinds of information that are out there, so that we can figure out what areas we may need to be aware of and be sensitive to. And we are also working to make sure that as geotechnical borings, additional geotechnical borings to fill in areas that have not been surveyed as of yet, that we have compliance to be able to be out there doing that kind of work. And this next slide shows an update of our milestone dates for the general reevaluation report. It highlights probably 4 of our bigger milestones. It doesn't highlight public and agency review of the draft general reevaluation report and draft EIS, but I will pencil that in as we go through. So the feasibility scoping meeting is currently scheduled for July 2011. That is later than was last reported to you, and I'll come back to that in a second. That is, again, where we're validating and disclosing to ourselves as an agency and to the partners, this is what we're saying the nature of the problem is out in the area. This is what we're doing in terms of investigations to come up with alternative plans to resolve the problems. We then will have two points in the study process where we will review the alternatives that we develop after the feasibility scoping meeting. We'll take an early look at them to make sure that we agree that we're on the right track and addressing the problems that we've identified. We'll go back and do a very detailed review of them at the alternative formulation briefing milestone. That is a very high bar within our agency. We have a lot of technical requirements that we satisfy, and that's the point in time where we're demonstrating that we've got the right alternatives, the right tentative recommendation that we anticipate putting before Congress. That is just before public and agency review. When we go into that milestone, we are actually requesting permission from Corps headquarters to release the draft report for the formal public and agency review period associated with the EIS and EIR. And after public and agency review, we deal with whatever policy questions we may still have out there from our agency's perspective, questions you may have as the partners, and any comments that may have been received we'll deal with from the public and agency review process. And basically at that point, we're finalizing to get to what we call a report of the Chief of Engineers, or Chief's Report. And that is the document that the agency sends to broader administration, the Office of Management and Budget, and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, who has ultimate jurisdiction for the Corps' Civil Works program. And they, in turn, take that document and make a recommendation to Congress. So that is the accumulation of the federal recommendation piece, and then it becomes an act for Congress to decide. So the end date for that Chief's Report has also slipped since we last were here and reported on schedule. It is about on the order of magnitude of a year and a half. I'll say up to a year and a half. And we don't take that lightly. What we've realized is that some of the scope was probably underestimated at the time for the extensiveness of the alternatives that we'll be evaluating as we go forward. We had been focusing the scope on issues with the existing levee system and sort of focused on what those would look like and what kind of time that would take. But what we're really doing is looking at maybe a more broader comprehensive fix for the region, not just better passing flows through your existing structures of the levees, but maybe being able to reoperate flows so that less is passing by in the river system and reducing the problem from that perspective. So that's resulted in a bit of an increase in scope. And what we're doing about it is increasing our level of management oversight to the investigation so that we can avoid that sort of thing again. I'll flip to the last slide, which is questions, in case you have any questions.
All right, Mr. Johannesson, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. You're going to be looking at a risk analysis, at least the input for a risk analysis model. And I know that DWR is working on that on a statewide basis for their levees in general. But you're focusing on property damage, and what about economic damage in the event of a catastrophic flood? You know, for example, the inundation of a train line that goes through and that type of thing.
Yes, anything that we can associate a monetary value with, we do. It's disruption of transportation corridors, potential disruption of emergency services and responses. It is an inventory of all of the structures in the floodplain, as well as an assessment of value of content, not just structure, of what value would be if they were damaged, either structure or content. So we cast a pretty wide net and have ways of being able to quantify those things to bring them into our benefit cost analysis.
And just shortly, what difference does it make if it shows a higher risk or lower risk in terms of what you all do, or what funding requests or?
Okay, let me approach that from a few different perspectives. First of all, the economic analysis focuses on the economics. The risk is a bit different, and that's a different type of analysis. So the economics is very quantifiable. It's sort of more of our traditional way of figuring out whether a project is justified or not. The risk analysis is a bit of an evolving piece. Fundamentally, we need to understand, and we quantify from engineering parameters, what is the risk and likeliness of a flood event, and who would be affected if it were to occur. So from the Corps' perspective, it's an unquantifiable, intangible piece. We're working on trying to quantify it in a way that would be nationally acceptable, broadly acceptable. Really what it comes down to is we talk about population and potential for impacts to that population. There is an annual, so that's for the project justification process. There is an annual budgeting process as part of the federal appropriations process, developing the president's budget. And I can say that in past years, the Office of Management and Budget and the administration have put an increasing emphasis on quantification of that risk to be competitive nationwide for federal appropriations, for studies, for design, for construction. And I will say that having a population the size or about the size that you do, almost 50,000 people is a competitive number. I can't speak to the exact details, but I will say you have a large population center, and that will help make you competitive, I would anticipate, in future years.
Great, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Christoph?
First of all, thank you. And we hope we get to see you soon. I hope we get to see you again and just continue with the updates. The vegetation policy. Where is the Corps on the veg policy? I know that you certainly are wrestling with it and all of that.
We are. And what I can say is that we recognize, the Corps recognizes it is a difficult policy for non-federal partners to adjust to take in, to strategize for how to adhere to it. And I will just say that we're working, the agency is working with the state of California and with resource agencies, because they have a role to play in this as well, and with local entities that have the actual operation and maintenance responsibility on site at that level. We're working to try and figure out how to make sure that everybody understands what our unique challenges are in this region with regards to levees and vegetation, because it is a little bit of a different perspective in California and in the Central Valley than it is in other parts of the country, for certain. And to continue to try and figure out how we can best assist you in coming into compliance. What that means, we don't know yet.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Mr. Villegas?
I too want to echo that. I know that's a huge near and dear issue for us, the vegetation policy. And I know that I'm glad that you made the distinction about how it affects us here, and what might be good for us may not be good for other parts of the country, and vice versa. We've heard that both here and in DC in terms of how other differences might exist. So I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much for coming out. We've come a long ways, I think, in terms of our relationship. I know that many years ago, the conversation about a GRR and truly an act of Congress was just so daunting in terms of the process. But I think we've now gone through several years of sort of understanding and with a newfound appreciation for your process. It is a workable process. I think we've come a long ways. I know this community has, at least this council has, in terms of being educated about what your process is, your systems that are in place, and how to work with them versus, feeling as if though it would never happen. I think we feel certainly a lot better, and by you being here this evening certainly makes that all the much better. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad for that, and I will live up to that. I will endeavor to live up to that.
Mr. Ledesma?
Thank you, and thank you for coming out tonight and giving the presentation. I'm relatively new, and so understanding your process where you are has been very helpful. I did have just a couple of follow-up questions. I thank the other council members for their questions, because they were ones that I had, but because I'm trying to understand the process, and as you go through your economic analysis and what I understand, you're establishing baselines, how we're going to be measured against going forward. Exactly. How much input are you getting from our staff, our local staff and others about where we are either on the economic, real estate, or even the status of our current levees and hydrology and so on?
I can at least say that we're the team is working very closely with Mr. Bissett and your city staff, okay, and their team of consultants. They're working really closely together. There's a lot of constant dialogue. I probably can't respond too in-depth in terms of specifics like real estate, but I'll look at Mr. Bissett and say I think it's a good collaborative process.
Okay.
I think it's a good example of how a non-federal partner and the Corps can work together well.
Okay.
If you'd
No,
like some more specifics, I can.
And I can ask
try and
Michael too,
respond
so.
to that.
I just wanted your feel for it as well, because when we do talk about kind of where we are, and you've heard a lot about where we are as a city, we have a ambition to keep moving. And so the snapshot of where we are with the data you have, which is as of a year or two ago, may be much different 2 years from now. And that's sort of where I'm getting at. And so we can continually provide you with that input. It's important. So as we establish that, I think it's just one of the items that I would have. And then the other one is I appreciate your feedback on kind of you've expanded the scope of kind of the study and to include other things, because I think that's probably one of the biggest risk areas we have. Just like our freeways, the water comes from a lot of different, cars come from a lot of different places, the water comes from a lot of different places. So it's important. That was a bit of information that I appreciated. But I really appreciate you coming out, giving us an update, and look forward to them going forward. I want to make sure the timeline is, I think, critical. And it's not tomorrow, from what the mayor said, but we want to make sure we do stick to that as closely as we can. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was not looking forward to seeing you for an extra 18 months, but thank you for being here this evening. There's so much to know, and there always will be. So I have no idea about the additional information that's required as part of the 18 months and the analysis and all the alternatives that we want to look at. But I look at it just through the lens of the same analysis the GRR is doing of the world. I'm also doing of the GRR, which is 18 months or potentially 2 years of deferral of significant improvements to the system is also a risk to life and property. And so, we just need to be sure that each additional increment that's going to make us this much smarter, if it's extending this much risk for 2 more years, that we ought to be taking that into account. And I know this process is designed to be fully exhaustive and as smart as possible. But I'm just, and I don't pretend to know any of the details that are driving this, but just as a caution that we take some snapshots, recognize that the world is going to change, but we've got to deal with whether we have to take a point and analyze what we've got and get to the solutions. So Mr. Bissett and HCR have briefed us on the 18 months, and I get it, but it's still troubling, because it does mean there's this extended period of time which we will not have the level of protection that we know that we all know the GR is going to indicate that is necessary at some level. It's not the level of protection that we have today. And I did want to when FEMA's put out maps that show without project, FEMA's maps in the region have shown not just without project, but without any levees at all. That's not what you're doing, right? Your without project is much more sophisticated than just if there were no levees in the world, this is what flooding might look like.
That is correct. We actually look at any structure, whether it's a federal project levy, a local entity sort of levy.
Yeah.
We look at the geography that's out there, and we look at how it could contribute. If water's up against it on one side, we need to understand how it could, if it could, contribute to a flood problem. So that's correct. It's a very different process.
And I guess we're also, hearing, words out of DC that indicates an increasing interest in risk analysis relative to cost-benefit analysis. Now, we've been focused very much on cost-benefit analysis. We expect that will continue to be part of the metric. But the sorts of conversations that are occurring in DC around paying more attention to, I think it's to relative risk and to risk analysis, this will answer, this is being done at a level of detail and sophistication that would answer those questions, right?
We will be able to answer questions related to risk of flooding, as well as anyone else will be able to, with the results of the analysis we're undertaking. We have something called a risk-based analysis, and it really is a process that is part of the economic analysis, just as a bit of a point of clarification.
I see.
And that's where we're addressing risk and uncertainty around the hydrology, hydraulics, geotechnical, and economic information as part of that, ultimately, that economic and engineering modeling.
All right. And all of this ultimately leads to Congress. Does it lead to an earmark, or is it a separate, is it not an earmark, but a different sort of congressional process?
There's actually two processes that govern Corps of Engineers Civil Works, and this is part of our Civil Works program. We require authorizations to do things and funding, appropriations to do things. So what you're speaking about in terms of earmarks is really more of the annual appropriation process. What the general revaluation report would do it would be anticipated to recommend to Congress that they give us a construction authority. In this case, it would actually be an additional construction authority from what the original project was that was already constructed.
All right. So I mean, the reason I ask is there's these politicians at the federal level talking about no more earmarks ever again. And I wouldn't want to invest all of your time and energy in a process that is designed to lead towards a request for an earmark. But so what you're saying is that when we're done with this process is intended to lead to an authorization. How the money then moves through the appropriations or budget process may or may not be an earmark, but it's.
And there is a bit of a relationship in that once Congress decides to authorize a project for construction, it's something that's under consideration for appropriations annually. And if Congress were to decide, or the president's budgeting process were to decide for whatever reason to not appropriate funding, then it could potentially be earmarked through congressional ads. Those wouldn't be on the table for discussion if it didn't have that underlying authorization. Congress can't appropriate funds for something they haven't authorized.
Right. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Good night.
Appreciate it. All right. This was a workshop only and a briefing, so we look forward to the next and final briefing in 6 weeks from now on the conclusion of this project. I think that's what the slide said, if I looked at it correctly. All right, by priority of the council, item 12 has been continued to a future meeting. Item 13 is review of new contract contingency expenditure guidelines and consideration of approval of amendment number 3 to the contract for professional services with Wood Rogers for the Bridge District infrastructure improvements. Mr. Bissett?
Good evening again. Tonight, in conjunction with tonight's agenda item, the council consideration of a contract amendment with Wood Rogers, we wanted to take the opportunity to address recent council concerns and questions regarding expenditure of contract contingency. I just have a quick PowerPoint to run through. We just wanted to highlight for the council what contingency is, what it isn't, how it's authorized, how we manage that process. So tonight's goals, I want to briefly highlight our past and current practice on use of construction contingencies, types of contracts which use contingency, variations in amounts of contingency, past performance, and improvements to monitor the use of contingencies. We've established some guidelines to enhance our management of expenditures of contract contingency. What is contingency? It's a set percentage of the construction contract amount budgeted for unforeseen conditions or design shortfalls identified after the construction project commences. Types of contingencies: public works construction contracts, professional services contracts, on-call services contracts, material purchase contracts. Next slide, please. What is contingency used for? This is what we want to highlight. Unforeseen, unpredictable site conditions, changes in quantities or materials, time delays, and scope or design changes. There's others, but these are the major ones. What we want to highlight, what contingency is not used for. It's not used for underbidding or bid mistakes by a contractor, errors caused by a contractor, corrective or non-compliant work, or repair of damaged work or existing improvements damaged by a contractor. Next slide, please. What we wanted to highlight in the past, when we've come to council to approve contracts, there's been different amounts requested for contingencies, and we wanted to highlight why those amounts vary. Some of the considerations that the project managers go through are the stage of project design, project complexity, environmental conditions particular to the project, construction restraints, and site requirements. So a typical contingency request is between the 5 and 10% range. That's for standard designs, few elements that we're concerned about, and relatively known conditions. As we start moving up for requests for increased contingency, there's other factors here that I highlight. What staff will do is they'll take their project, they'll analyze the conditions, they'll reflect on these type of items and come up with a recommendation and a request to council, and they'll justify that request through their staff report. So you can look for this type of analysis to come your way in the future. Tonight's contract actually, that we're looking at getting a contract amendment, had a 5% contingency on it. We analyzed city's historic use of contingency. We looked back at the past 5 years and some of the more major projects that you'll be familiar with. And we got good results. We've noticed that staff has done a good job of managing projects. Obviously the blue line is what was expended, and the total was the contingency that was authorized. So that was good news for us. We were happy to show that and bring that to council's attention tonight, that we do have a good history of managing contract contingency, but we're looking at ways to provide more guidance to staff and more oversight over how contingency is expended.
Mike, do you track who uses and who doesn't as much as you do the kinds of projects, or is that part of your presentation? In other words, I mean, a lot of these contractors we use pretty regularly on some of this stuff.
No, we don't. I don't have that in the slides tonight. Most of these projects that are highlighted in that previous slide are by different contractors and different project managers as well. The last slide is basically to highlight the new guidance, just a snapshot of what it is. We're clarifying who and at what amounts has the authority to expend the use of contract contingency on capital projects, so that the project managers know what their authorized amounts are, what percentages of a contingency they're authorized to expend, and when it goes beyond their authority, they have to move it up the vertical chain within the city. We have more reporting guidance that throughout the life of a project, when certain milestones of a contingency is expended, there's going to be communication up to the Public Works Director and to the city manager so that everybody's aware how contingency is being utilized and at what levels. So I just wanted to highlight that tonight before I moved on to the item at hand, but I wanted to see if there was any questions on that. I know I ran through fairly quickly.
Yeah. Mayor Pro Tem Christoph.
Just to follow up on Oscar's comment, I mean, I think it would be useful for the various contractors that we do employ, because it seems to be cyclical. We employ the same ones over and over again to do a lot of the work because they do the best bids and all the other kinds of things. But it would be helpful to have what their contingencies were, and do they stay within those contingencies? You know, I mean, sometimes I realize there's some circumstances that are beyond anybody's control that, you know, blow up a project. But I mean, at the same time, I think that, you know, we hire enough people that we could get some kind of database out of that, and then that could be part of our, you know, awarding of a bid process. So,
Yeah.
okay.
And we have that information, it just wasn't the piece of information we presented.
Can I just follow up on that, though?
Yeah.
And I'm not looking to make extra work, but if we go down that road and that information is shared, I don't want just numbers, because I think I will probably draw conclusions that aren't accurate. I'd rather have some sense of analysis about, at least some summary of analysis in terms of, you know, were they standard projects versus custom? I mean, there's got to be some thought into kind of why the numbers are what they are. I'd rather not draw my own conclusions without good or some analysis.
Right. Yep.
So in that chart, since it's gone now, we don't have it. For a $500,000 project, the project manager could authorize the expenditure of $49,000 worth of contingency?
Of 10% of the contingency.
Oh,
So
10% of the contingency.
of the contingency, which is typically 10% of the contract amount.
So the numbers that were in the categories, the 300,000 greater than and less than 300,000, is that, that the project is 300,000?
Right.
Right.
That's correct.
And then the other numbers are of contingency?
Exactly. So we've lowered the threshold of authorization for the project managers that they can just authorize at their level. They have to, if it goes beyond their authority, it has to go up to the Public Works Director and/or the city manager, depending on the levels of the change order. And we're going to do that in a manner that we don't slow up the project. So we're communicating these new guidelines to the project managers. We're going to be rolling this out within the next several weeks. This contract tonight has already utilized the new guidelines. I wanted to emphasize that. Toby Wong, the project manager, has worked closely with myself and the Public Works Director to communicate these contract change orders. So he's following the guidelines that we're putting in place. Should I move on?
Yeah, any more questions on the general policy? Right.
I guess, I'm sorry. The only thing, I mean, I know that I've raised the question, I think the last 2 times we've had a major contract, because the contingency wasn't the standard 10%, it was 15%. And so I had some concerns on why is it 15% versus 10%. And of course, you had explanations for it, and so that was fine. But I know that the last 2 times that we had major projects, especially in the Bridge District, it was the 15% figure, and that raised a flag as far as I was concerned.
And that's up to the project managers to identify why they're requesting a contingency at that amount. And that should be reflected within the staff report.
Okay.
For the Wood Rogers contract before you tonight for your consideration, council authorized a 5% contingency on that contract. There's been 2 contract amendments to date. Neither one of those have utilized the contingency that was authorized. There has been some additional tasks that have been authorized by the project manager specific to underground utility design, redesign of the drainage infiltration system, and other highlighted items within the staff report. These additional tasks that have been authorized and are underway in design are within the contingency amount, so they're not over and above what council has authorized. What we're doing tonight is we've identified additional design components that need to be worked into the contract, which will take us above the authorized contingency amount. So we're coming to council at this time to get your approval for those expenditures. And we've highlighted the reasons why they're necessary within the staff report. But just to briefly summarize, PG&E had concerns regarding their gas main locations under the storm drain infiltration system in the sidewalk. Those concerns were not brought to light until after the events that happened in San Bruno for the PG&E force, the gas mains that erupted, that brought increased scrutiny over their designs regionally and probably wherever they have their projects. But it emphasized this project, and it caused PG&E to have concerns over the designs that had already been completed. So after a series of meetings, it was concluded that additional design needed to take place, and those are one of the components that we received a bid from Wood Rogers on. We identified a scope and fee for that work. There was also utility designs for housing obligations that came to light after the Wood Rogers contract was in place, but it is part of the Bridge District project that needs to be delivered at a certain time frame. So those designs need to take place also. So the total requested amount to fund the additional work takes us $39,000 over the approved contingency amount. It would take us to about a 6.4% contingency. Staff is also requesting an additional $50,000 of added contingency to take us throughout the remainder of the construction project, which is about 25% complete. Combining those two to 39,000 and the 50, that takes us to, combined with the existing authorization, it combines to about an 8.1% contingency. So it's less than your standard 10%. It's obviously more than what was initially requested, but the justifications are within the staff report. I did want to highlight that early next year, we're currently working on getting bids from the contractor to construct these added design elements that we're hoping to get authorized tonight. And those items will be taken to council probably in February of next year for authorization for the contract portion of that work. So I just wanted to give you a heads up that that would be coming early next year. This concludes my presentation, so I'll turn it back to the council.
So, just process-wise, you've already, this work's already been done or is underway. You've already committed us to the outcome, right? I mean,
No, we have not. That's what we wanted to make clear, that we have not done that. We've authorized some work to be done within the previously approved contingency, but we have not authorized work to go beyond the approved contingency. That's what we're here to do tonight.
okay, so the utility pieces that you've already directed would be wholly within the contingency?
Exactly. The additional items, like the PG&E items that I talked about and the providing utilities to the housing, that would take us $39,000 over the contingency, but that work has not been authorized.
So this is, maybe you can refresh my memory, this is a complex project with lots, that's largely unknown site conditions in a lot of ways. I mean, we knew all of those things. If we were using the matrix that you described earlier, this project would have had a 15% contingency, or somewhere in that neighborhood. Did we insist that it be 5%? Was this account? Did you propose something different? And
No, staff brought
it to us
you
at 5%?
Because it was a large dollar amount for the Wood Rogers contract. It was $2 point something million. Staff felt at that time that a 5% contingency would be enough to take us through the design process. It was, and it would have been close, but these PG&E issues and the infiltration system issues have taken it over.
But we're not done either. So, okay, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem Christoph.
Yeah. Is it the drainage system that is the reason for the price increases? Because, I mean, I know they're trying some drainage system that is not typical. And so is that one of the issues?
It is the issue. The force mains were going to be directly under the infiltration system, which is basically a porous material. They were concerned that any breakage in their line, the gas would be able to flow freely through a porous material as opposed to like a clay material.
No, I understand PG&E's issue. I do. I mean, and I understand how come they're so cautious. The question I have is, this project came to us, I'm going to say 2 years ago, and they wanted to, in essence, put in a whole new kind of drainage system, not the typical subdivision kind of drainage system that, we're all used to. They came in with some new system that, for whatever reason, and is that the problem? Is that one of the issues?
I believe some of the design components for that system have utilized contingency. But the issues at hand tonight, and Toby Wong is the...
Well, will it work? I mean, one of the other questions I have is, we've got a whole new drainage system here. Everybody is very concerned about flood issues and all of the other kinds of things. Two questions. Number one, is this in essence, sort of a flawed system that requires different contingencies and different changes all the time? And in the end result, will it work?
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. To answer your question, the drainage system that's being implemented is a driving force on a lot of these changes because it has never been used the way we're using it. You know, we're draining everything into the ground and not a traditional, pipe system. Now, we do have what we call a relief system that kind of takes the current drainage that's going out of the system, that if the infiltration system doesn't work, it'll take some of the drain, through the pipe system like it normally does drain, but it is, the construction of this unique system is kind of causing a lot of these changes, and as we go through construction with the contractor, how it gets built and how it works, so we're trying the best we can to, build a system that's gonna work and it's gonna be maintained by city staff, so those are some of the issues that's causing some of these changes.
I guess one of the concerns, and we raised this issue a couple of years ago with the development group. This wasn't something that was done because it was cheaper and not as effective as the old system?
Well, it's cheaper because, this.
Well, you don't have the pipes.
The system we're implementing doesn't require a detention basin.
Right.
And the conditions of the bridge district allows the use of this because of the sandy material. And any other location, you wouldn't be able to use this system because sands allow the water to go through the ground. And that's why, and that was brought up through our geotechnical evaluations. And it was decided that, we can implement this system to infiltrate the water into the ground. That's why we went to this system.
Okay. Because one of the major concerns I would have, and that is to go ahead and start doing whatever we do at the Bridge District, and all of a sudden it not work. And then you have to go in and dig it all out and do whatever you have to do. And, that is, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, you gotta understand, only way to implement this similar system, you gotta have the same conditions with the sandy material. So as you do a project, you go through the geotechnical analysis and you determine that the site, is suited for this type of system, and Bridge District is ideally because of high ground and the sandy conditions, that's why we're implementing the system. If we're in Southport where there's clay, you wouldn't be able to use the system to do the drainage. You would do a typical, piping system to drain with detention basins. And because the fact we're not building a detention basin, we're lessening the impact of developable property, and that's another reason why we chose the system.
Yeah, no, I understand. That part I certainly understand. Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Johannesson.
Yeah, maybe just to chime in on that point, my understanding is it's water permeable cement is what is being used there, and it is being used elsewhere in the country. And this cost savings would be the detention basin and the opening up of available land. And I recall during the TTAC discussions, that was a significant cost savings that allowed this project to proceed. And so it's really what happens, I think, is the water will sit on the cement and then go down into sand or rocks or whatever. Then you also have a redundant system along with it. And I think that was a compromise that you all reached, that it's not strictly a water permeable cement, but there's a double redundancy there to assure that the system works.
You are correct that there's a redundant, pipe system. To answer your question about the permeable concrete, that was kind of the first thought as we went through the design process. But really what happens is, it's based on the infiltration rate of the ground. And we have real, pervious material out there. And based on that, we calculate a volume that, based on a storm event, on how much would go into the ground, and how much storage you need to basically, store that before, when the infiltration rate hits its design point, so that it'll hold the water, allow the water to go into the ground and continue flowing. So, the rock section is basically our storage layer, and that's what holds the water that doesn't go into the ground quick enough as the storm event passes. So the permeable concrete, there is some that's gonna allow it. Most of our water goes through these, what we call infiltration DIs, that goes into these rock sections that basically filters right into the ground. So during typical, 20, 25-year events, you're probably not gonna see any water into this rock section, but the big events, there's volume inside the rock that'll hold the water that doesn't get into the ground because that infiltration rate, it's not high enough.
All right. Further discussion? All right. Then we have a request from the city manager.
Mr. Mayor, I would move approval of amendment number 3 to the contract for professional services with Wood Rogers dated January 21st, 2009, to include an additional design and construction support services, and also authorize an additional $39,020 in contingency funding from the 2014 planned capital improvement budget to fully fund amendment number 3, plus another $50,000 for the added contingency during the remainder of the Bridge District's infrastructure improvement construction contract, totaling $89,020 in additional contingency authorization.
It's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Christoph and seconded by Mr. Johannesson. So, no further discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Council calendar, Ms. Richardson.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, this is our last meeting of the month. We won't be meeting again until January 12th. And just a reminder that city offices will be closed from Christmas Eve on the 24th and reopen on January 3rd.
Any questions on the calendar? City manager report.
Just to report that the city management staff met this week, Monday and Tuesday, to prepare for the next budget and to prepare for the council strategic planning session. And we'll have some products available to you shortly after the first of the year.
Questions for the city manager, Mr. Johannesson?
Do we have the dates yet of the sessions?
February
Yes.
14th, 15th, and 16th.
February 4th, okay.
All right, city attorney report.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Once again, to thank you all very much for the kind remarks and the presentation tonight, and wish you a great new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Staff direction from members of the council, Mr. Johannesson.
I would just request that Mr. Murphy bring us back some oranges soon.
All right, and we have no future agenda item requests. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Mr. Villegas and seconded by Mr. Johannesson that the meeting be adjourned. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.